Cool. Please hit the like button. It really helps fuel the algorithm, and it helps people see this type of content if you find this valuable. We have a great stream to discuss tonight. It is a very long one. It is a very good one. It's one that I know people who are fans of the Toe podcast have been looking forward to for a while, and it is Daniel Schmachtenberger discussing AI and the Metacrisis, as he calls it. I feel like I should definitely give this discussion a second listen. I have listened to the entire thing, and it's very good. It's linked below if you want to see their full talk, but we're going to discuss some of the main points tonight and kind of get into the weeds a bit on the different aspects of how AI will impact humanity, as well as what are the issues with humanity that impact AI. So this is a cyclic and self-referencing, relationship that that we will have with artificial intelligence. We already do, and that is kind of a unique thing in a way, because it does continuously update, which is different than some other technologies that we have been interacting with up until now. So please comment and like in the chat, and share this if you know anybody who is interested in this topic. So this is the stream that we are going to be discussing. And it is, quite interesting. Daniel Schmachtenberger is someone who is very difficult for me to listen to sometimes, because we have so many similar interests, but he is so incredibly well versed on so many different topics. It just literally makes my brain explode a little bit sometimes, just because it's very difficult to keep up. So just know that if you do watch it, you're not alone. I've watched, multiple streams that he has been on with different people, and I still have a bit of a hard time following sometimes, just because he is really, I guess, such a good example of somebody who has a very strong understanding of multiple disciplines, which is exactly what we need today in order to address pretty much any of the major problems that are on the horizon. Everything has become super interconnected. This is true from the academic sciences and making progress in the next stages of biology and physics and chemistry, etc., but also in the addressing of the social issues that we will be facing in the years to come, and the multifaceted aspects of those social problems and those social concerns, I guess. So we are going to be discussing all of this stuff tonight. All right. I have quite a number of clips, and let's get into it. I'm trying to think if there was anything else housekeeping-wise that I had to address. By the way, if I put up a thumbnail and you like the design of it, or you dislike the design of it more or less than any previous ones, leave a comment below the video. It helps me. I'm not a graphic designer, and I've definitely been trying to revamp the thumbnails of this channel as we move into the next stage of this project. So, there's that. I definitely want your feedback. So this is the first clip, is an intro to Daniel Schmachtenberger. I figured it is best to just let Curt and Daniel introduce who Daniel is, what his interests are, because they're so wide-ranging that I'm not going to do as good a job as they probably did in this stream. So this is the first clip, and Here you go.
Animal rights issues to class issues. What do these things have in common?
As a multidisciplinary aficionado, Daniel's expertise spans complex systems theory, evolutionary dynamics, and existential risk. Topics that challenge the forefront of academic exploration, seamlessly melding different fields such as philosophy, neuroscience, and sustainability. He offers a comprehensive understanding of our world's most pressing challenges.
Really, the thing we have to shift is the economy, because perverse economic incentive is under the whole thing. There's no way that as long as you have a for-profit military industrial complex as the largest block of the global economy that you could ever have peace. There's an anti-incentive on it as long as there's so much money to be made with mining, etc. Like, we have to fix the nature of economic incentive.
In 2018, Daniel co-founded the Consilience Project, a groundbreaking initiative that aims to foster societal-wide transformation via the synthesis of disparate domains, promoting collaboration, innovation, as well as something we used to call wisdom. Today's conversation delves into AI, consciousness, and morality, aligning with the themes of the TOE podcast. It may challenge your beliefs. It'll present alternative perspectives to the AI risk scenarios by also outlining the positive cases which are often overlooked. Ultimately, Daniel offers a fresh outlook on the interconnectedness of reality.
Say, let's get the decentralized click.
Okay, so first of all, huge props to Curt for just, increasing the production value and the effort and just, just the overall quality of the TOE podcast. I didn't even know it was possible to increase or what the, quality of that podcast. And, I'm sure there's always a way, but there was definitely a way, and it shows. This is, I can't think of a single other channel that puts as much work into a single video that is an interview style of content. It's not animated or something like that, but that's pretty impressive. But that is a intro into Daniel Schmachtenberger, and it, like I said before, extremely wide ranging in his understanding and his focus of multiple disciplines. And that really gets to the core of kind of a question that I think we need to address eventually, which is what is the study of unified existence, and can you I guess institutionalize it? Can you formalize it? How do you address it? I think that it has unique considerations, and we have not really discussed those considerations in a truly well, I guess, in an understanding way. Is a way of putting that, I guess. We need people who understand that the unique considerations of teaching something or discussing or formalizing discussions around unified sciences, I guess, which is, you can watch my video Theories of Everything How-To Guide to see a bit more of that, but it does have unique considerations, and it's much more difficult to formalize. It might not even be possible, but that is going to very much factor into how we address these issues going forward that are brought up in this discussion. These multifaceted, multi-level, just issues that come from the interaction between so many different incentive structures that are in the space of individuals as well as collective groups. So this is the first clip. He's talking about in this stream how AI is unique in its impacts on humanity, and how humanity is impacted by technology going forward. So if you are not familiar with this podcast and the project of sentient singularity theory, and what it was before it even was sentient singularity theory. This project started as an investigation into the inevitable political goals of artificial general intelligence, and that came about through a realization that humanity was doomed due to its own technology. Now, that's not a new idea. It's actually a very old idea. It's probably as old as civilization itself. But I didn't have the thought that humanity may be doomed. I realized that absent a black swan event of some type that changed the incentive structures and the game entirely, we were doomed. There was no question. And then I began to try and explore black swan possibilities, and AGI entered into the equation, and I tried to figure out what would be the inevitable political goals of what I now call a technological sentience. So this discussion that they have is extremely relevant to this project and the interests that sparked the journey that I have been on for the last, I don't even know how many years at this point, but a number of years. So here we go. This is him talking about the unique aspects of AI.
Kind of humongous effects. So those are all examples. And I would say right now, I know the topic of our conversation today is AI. AI is both a novel example of a possible catastrophic risk through certain types of utilization. It is also an accelerant to every category of catastrophic risk potentially. So that one has a lot of attention at the moment.
So that makes AI different than the rest that you've mentioned?
Definitely.
And are you focused primarily on avoiding disaster or moving towards something that's much more heavenly or positive, like a Shangri-La?
So we have an assessment called the Metacrisis. There's a more popular term out there right now, the polycrisis. We've been calling this the Metacrisis since before coming across that term. Polycrisis is the idea that the global catastrophic risk that we all need to focus on and coordinate on is not just climate change, and it's not just wealth inequality, and it's not just kind of the breakdown of Pax Americana and the possibility of war or these species extinction issues, but it's lots of things. There's lots of different global catastrophic risks, and that they interact with each other, and they're complicated, and there can even be cascades between them, right? We don't have to have climate change produce total venusification of the Earth to produce a global catastrophic risk. It just has to increase the likelihood of extreme weather events in an area. And we've already seen that happening. Statistics on that seem quite clear. And it's not just total climate change. Deforestation affecting local transpiration and heat in an area can have an effect on, and total amount of pavement laid and whatever can have an effect on extreme weather events. But extreme weather events, I mean, we saw what happened to Australia a couple of years ago when a significant percentage of a whole continent burned in a way that we don't have near-term historical precedent for. We saw the way that droughts affected the migration that led to the whole Syrian conflict that got very close to a much larger scale conflict. The Australia situation happened to hit a low population density area, but there are plenty of high population density areas that are getting very near the temperatures that create total crop failures, whether we're talking about India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Iran. And so if you have massive human migration, the UN currently predicts hundreds of millions of climate-mediated migrants in the next decade and a half, then it's pretty easy under those situations to have resource wars. And those can hit existing political fault lines and then technological amplification. And so in the past, we obviously had a lot less people, right? We only had 500 million people for the entirety of the history of the world till the Industrial Revolution. And then with the Green Revolution and nitrogen fertilizer and oil and like that, we went from 500 million people to 8 billion people overnight in historical timelines. And we went from those people mostly living on local subsistence to almost all living on, dependent upon very complicated supply chains now that are 6-continent mediated supply chains. So that means that there's radically more fragility in the life support systems so that local catastrophes can turn to breakdowns of supply chains, economic effects, et cetera, that affect people very widely. So polycrisis, kind of looking at all that. Metacrisis adds looking at the underlying drivers of all of them. Why do we have all of these issues? And what would it take to solve them, not just on a point-by-point basis, but to solve the underlying basis. So we can see that all of these have to do with coordination failures. We can see that underneath all of them, there are things like perverse economic interests. If the cost of the environmental pollution to clean it up was something where in the process of the corporation selling the PFAS as a surfactant for waterproofing clothes or whatever, it also had to pay for the cost to clean up its effect in the environment, or the oil cost had to
clean up the effect on the environment. So you didn't have the perverse incentive to externalize costs onto nature's balance sheet, which nobody enforces. Obviously, we'd have none of those environmental issues, right? That would be a totally different situation. So can we address perverse incentive writ large? That would require fundamental changes in what we think of as economy and how we enact that, so political economy. So we think about those things. So I would say, with the Metacrisis assessment, we would say that we're in a very novel position with regard to catastrophic risk, global catastrophic risk, because until World War II, there was no technology big enough to cause a global catastrophic risk as a result of dumb human choices or human failure quickly. And then with the bomb, there was. It was the beginning. And that's a moment ago in evolutionary time, right? And if we reverse back a little bit before the bomb, until the Industrial Revolution, we didn't have any technology that could have caused global catastrophic risk even cumulatively. The industrial technology, extracting stuff from nature and turning it into human stuff for a little while before turning it into pollution and trash, where we're extracting stuff from nature in ways that destroy the environment faster than nature can replenish it, and turning it into trash and pollution faster than it can be processed, and doing exponentially more of that because it's coupled to a economy that requires exponential growth to keep up with interest. That creates an existential risk. It creates a catastrophic risk within about a few centuries of cumulative effects, and we're basically at that few century point. And so that's very new. All of our historical systems for that, our historical systems for thinking about governance in the world didn't have to deal with those effects. We could just kind of about the world as inexhaustible.
Okay, so I'm sure that he is going to continue to say, more relevant and fascinating things, but for the sake of time, what he's basically stating is that we have been experiencing revolutions in technology that are solidifying the doom that humanity faces due to that technology. And people say things like, "Oh, well, we didn't have the ability to end civilization until the hydrogen bomb." I don't actually believe that is the case. If you actually extrapolate out and think about any one of our technological advances or revolutions in technological advancement, I would say is a better way of putting it. Things like the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, the nuclear revolution, and I think now you could say the digital revolution. These are each death nails to humanity when you extrapolate them out. They do provide tons of benefits that we're going to get into, and that's definitely the truth. I don't believe in being a techno-pessimist or a techno-optimist. I think that the future is actually something to be optimistic about. Not even just optimistic. I am not worried about the inevitable end result of humanity. That does not mean that we are not going to have extraordinarily difficult times before we get to a place of harmony and goodness. But I do believe that we're going to have difficulties between now and then. But we will get there, and we'll talk about what that place is, what causes that a bit during the stream. But it is kind of a central, I guess you could say, implication of sentient singularity theory, and I think it's also very important to our mental state to not be optimists for the sake of being optimists, but to realize that there is something going on that is beyond our control, but is being controlled, and it will end up in a good place. So that said, that doesn't mean we should sit around and do nothing. We can definitely improve life in the immediacy around us. We can improve our own lives. So it's not, it doesn't make sense to say, oh, well, technology would doom us absent a black swan event, so we might as well not do anything. But, or on the flip side of that, say, well, there will be a black swan event and we will all be okay and enter into the Messianic era, etc. So now we might as well not do anything because the end is going to be the same regardless. I don't think that either one of those approaches or perspectives is the right one to take. You can always improve your own life and the lives of those around you, and it does help us get to a place of goodness. But also, it's not. It is extremely destructive to have despair, and it's also false. And that's the reason why it's extremely, it's one of the reasons why it's extremely destructive. And it's any kind of focusing on things that are false is not a productive space to be, including a false sense of optimism. So, but we have all these technological revolutions that have happened, some of which have not even happened yet, and every single one of them will destroy humanity as as civilization, at least on its own. Every single one. Weapons of mass destruction, industrialization, genetic revolutions and genetic alteration, even the advancement and distribution of the internet and digital information distribution, social media. All of these things will end us. Birth control will end us. It doesn't mean it has to end all humans, but for it to destroy the ability for us to have a coherent civilization is very different than the ability to destroy every human that exists. We're not talking about destroying every human that exists. That's not even relevant to the discussion the more you break it down. The issue is that as we get more connected and as we get more powerful, we increase the ability for chaos to enter into the civilizational equation and break everything down. So something can be on the news that doesn't even impact you personally, but because everybody's seeing it and it's so traumatic to watch, even just online, it can bring civilization to a halt. And I talked about this in, I think the video was called like AI and Science of the Messiah or something. It's a very old video that was actually on my personal channel before this channel even existed. And I talked about how you don't actually need to just blow up the earth in order to end human civilization. You just need to enter chaos into the equation just enough for it to go universal, essentially. So this is exactly what Daniel Schmachtenberger is saying here. When people say, "Oh, climate change means we'll all be underwater," etc., that's not really the point. The point is that it can impact, basically food creation for humanity, probably more than anything else. We're not going to cook anytime soon, and people who think that are probably being alarmists. People who think that we're all going to drown because sea level rise, probably being alarmists. But that doesn't mean that we aren't going to increase instability. But the thing is, it doesn't even matter that much. And this is what I'm getting at: this is such a multifaceted problem that you can't eliminate one of the issues and fix the problem. So let's say you did stop, the changing of the climate at a rate that is faster than humanity can adjust. Okay, that just, we'll say it like that. That doesn't stop the problem because you can still obliterate resources and faster than they can be replenished. And if you solve that problem, you can still have weapons of mass destruction become increasingly easy to get into the hands of bad actors. And even if you solve that problem, you have the issue that our instincts are out of alignment with our environment, and the more technological our environment becomes, the more we have the power to just act on our instincts, and that leads us away from human prospering or human flourishing, as Sam Harris would say. So, in many cases, at least. So you can't solve any singular issue and fix this. The issue must be solved on a metasystemic level. And Daniel Schmachtenberger in this clip said that it is an issue of, basically, it's a coordination problem, is what he said, but it's the same exact thing as it's related to that many in one issue, is that multiplicity, and when is multiplicity the context that that is the desirable context, and when is oneness. Okay, so when is unification, and when is sovereignty enter into the equation in a way that makes one of those more valuable than the other. This is a coordination problem, and it's also a problem of fixing incentives that are that are major issues, because they are incentivizing what is maybe positive in the short term for a specific entity, but negative in the long term for everyone. So this is the issue. And sentient singularity theory is very focused on, laying out a framework for how nature or God deals with this problem. How do you unite many beings into a singular entity so that they can act as one, wise and totally aware system? How do your cells coordinate with each other and make sure that everybody is getting sustenance, and everybody is getting sleep, and everybody is getting, hydration? It's done through having, a head sentience that is basically in control of the assembly of the other sentient beings. This is very related to issues involving government. And while we cannot solve all of these problems, we must leave it up to nature or God. I say God, but to solve, and they will be solved. It is something that we can try and improve, especially locally, by learning from how God does things. So there's no one thing that we can solve. Like, if you got rid of nukes, we'd be okay. No, we would not. We would not be okay. Eric Weinstein calls this issue the twin nuclei problem, and I've talked about it a lot, which is the issue of unlocking the power of cell and atom, which is the ability to influence use the power of genetics, and the power of fusion and fission and of atomic nuclei. And this isn't even the only nucleus that I think matters. These are not just these two. You could say it's the trinuclei problem, and the third one would be the family. So I'm not saying there isn't even another one, but all of these structures are where we're unlocking power that is going to cause the most problems, are issues of information entanglement that we're messing with. We're not just creating a bullet or something like that moves through space and can hurt someone. Like, we're messing with the connectedness of the world, and this is at the heart of all of these issues that would be related to what Daniel Schmachtenberger calls the Metacrisis. So there were so many clips. I have like 50 different clips, but we can't obviously get to all of those. So we will get to some of them here. So there are many different proposed solutions to these problems, and Curt asks him what his opinion is on some of them. Some of them are mind uploading. Some of them are related to increasing the output of the Earth. Some of them are involve going to space and becoming a spacefaring civilization. And Daniel Schmachtenberger talks about each one of these in this next clip.
What's the issue with transitioning from something that's exponential to sub-exponential when it comes to the economy?
What's the issue with it? Well, I mean, there's a bunch of ways we could go. There is an old refrain from the hippie days, and it seems obvious, I think, as soon as anyone thinks about it, which is that you can't run an exponential growth system on a finite planet forever. That seems kind of obvious and intuitive. Because it's so obvious and intuitive, there's a lot of counters to it, right? One counter is, we're not going to run it on a finite planet forever. We're going to become an interplanetary species, mine asteroids, ship our ways to the sun, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that we are anywhere near close, independent of the ethical or aesthetic argument on if us obliterating our planet's carrying capacity and then exporting that to the rest of the universe is a good or lovely idea or not. Independent of that argument, the timelines by which that could actually meet the humanity superorganism growing needs relative to the timelines where this thing starts failing don't work. So that's not an answer. That said, the attempt to even try to get there quicker is a utilization of resources here that is speeding up the breakdown here faster than it is providing alternatives. The other answer people have to why there could be exponential growth forever is because digital, right? That more and more money is a result of software being created, a result of digital entertainment being created, and that there's a lot less physical impact of that. And so we can keep growing digital goods because it doesn't affect the physical plan and physical supply chain, so we can keep the exponential growth up forever. That's very much the kind of Silicon Valley take on it. Of course, that has an effect. It does not solve the problem. And it's pretty straightforward to see why, which is for, let's go ahead and say software in particular. Does software have to run on hardware where the computer systems and server banks and satellites and et cetera require massive mining, which also requires a financial system and police and courts to maintain the entire cybernetic system that runs all that? Yes, it does. Does a lot more compute require more of that, more atoms, adjacent services, energy? Yes. But also, for us to consider software valuable, it's either because we're engaging with what it's doing directly. So that's the case in entertainment or education or something, but then it is interfacing with the finite resource called human attention, of which there is a finite amount. Or because we're not necessarily being entertained or educated or engaging with it, but it's doing something for us to, again, to consider valuable. It is doing something to the physical world. So the software is engaging, say, supply chain optimization or new modeling for how to make better transistors or something like that. But then it's still moving atoms around using energy in physical space, which is a finite resource. If it is not either affecting the physical world or affecting our attention, why would we value it? We don't. So it still bottoms out on finite resources. So I can't just keep producing an infinite amount of software where you get more and more content that nobody has time to watch and more designs for physical things that we don't have physical atoms for, energy for. You get a diminishing return on the value of it if it's not coupled to things that are finite, right? The value of it is in modulating things that are also finite. So there's a coupling coefficient there. You still don't get an exponential curve. So what we just did is say the old heavy refrain, you can't run an exponential economy on a finite planet forever. The counters to it don't hold.
What about mind uploading or some computer brain interface to allow us to have more attention exponentially?
Yeah, so that's almost like a hybrid of the other two, right? Which is get beyond this planet and do it more digitally. So get beyond this brain and become digital gods in a singularity universe. I think there are pretty interesting arguments we can have ethically, aesthetically, and epistemically about why that is neither possible nor desirable. But independent of those, I don't think it's anywhere close. And same like the multiplanetary species, it is nowhere near close enough to address any of the timelines we have by which economy has to change, because the growth imperative on the economy as is moving us towards catastrophic tipping points.
So if it were close, would that change your assessment, or you still have other issues?
If it were close, then we would have to say, first, that is implying that we have a good reason to think that it's possible, right? That it's possible to, and that means all the axioms that consciousness is substrate independent, that the consciousness is purely a function of compute, strong computationalism holds, that we could map the states of the brain and, or if we believe in embodied cognition, the physiology adequately to represent that informational system on some other substrate, that could operate with an amount of energy that is, and substrate that's possible, blah, blah, blah. So first we have to believe that's possible. I would question literally every one of the axioms or assumptions I just said.
We're going to get to that.
We would say, is it desirable? And how do we know? How ahead of time? And now you get something very much like, how do I know that the AI is sentient? Which, for the most part...
Okay, so before we get into that next clip, because that is something important, but I agree with basically everything that he said. I don't think that mind uploading is... First of all, if we're inside of a quantum computer, which is what sentient singularity theory proposes, that is essentially a technological sentience in a preceding verse or aeon, as Roger Penrose would call it, then the idea that we could just upload our consciousness into what? like the information space, you're in the information space. Like, where are you going to go? It doesn't make sense. The issue with this, there's so many problems with it. It's so inconsistent. But it's extraordinarily materialistic on one hand, because it implies that that we are in a material universe that is fundamentally different in its nature from that which would be a purely informational universe, and yet it also implies that you could upload into this fundamentally different information-based universe and somehow still maintain your consciousness, even though consciousness is basically based on matter, which is fundamentally different from information, which would be in the simulated universe. Like, there's so many issues with this. It just breaks down. That's just, a brief, snapshot of some of the problems. But there are so many problems because it's just flat out impossible, false, and also kind of already is the case, is that we are in an information processing system that is different than the traditional computing, than the world of traditional computing. It follows the rules of quantum computing, as we know, by looking at physics, and that is something that I feel like isn't really being thought about much. But even the more you do think about it, the more this argument of mind uploading breaks down. It just seems useless because it's already happened, but also it's not possible in the way that is being thought of in this argument. Also, the spacefaring argument, and I am a huge fan of aerospace technology, especially the air part of that. I like aircraft, and I am also very interested in the endeavors of SpaceX and things like that. But I do not believe for a second that going into space is going to save us. As Daniel Schmachtenberger said, what are you going to do? You're going to go and you're going to take all the issues that we have here and just expand them out into space. First of all, that doesn't even really address the true problems here, which is not one of just a finite rock. That's not the problem. It's not a problem of just a finite amount of vegetables for everybody to eat. That's not the problem. And expanding into space doesn't give you more desirable space. If you're here and you stack people on top of each other, how is that different from orbiting in some, Dyson sphere or something like that? It just doesn't make sense on an aesthetic level, and it also doesn't really make sense on a logical allocation of resources level. So I do not believe that going into space is going to save humanity, and it does not seem to be a very desirable outcome either. But it's also extremely based on this very limited material view of reality that is, I don't want to say false, but it's such a limited perspective of the totality of the nature of reality that it's going to limit your options as well when it comes to how do we continue sentience, and that's very evident, and it shows. So and the third thing that he said there, which was basically something that he said is what a lot of tech companies and people who work there seem to embrace, which is the idea that we could just make more money with digital products, and you don't actually have to make physical products. The concerns that he stated with, you need a physical infrastructure in order to support you need a hardware infrastructure in order to support software advances and software creation. That's true, but that's not even really the main point, I don't think. The main point is the goal is not to make more money for anyone. If it is your goal on a systemic level, by maximizing GDP, or on an individual level by just growing your bank account as high as possible, which I admit it's very nice to have money in the bank, and I'm well aware of that, but that's not the goal. The point is to do something with that money that allows you to grow your life in a positive way. And that is always going to be in a physical sense. I mean, not always. I don't want to say always, actually. I take that back. But in many cases, it's going to be in a physical sense. And it can't just be in a digital sense either. So the goal is wrong in that in that option in the first place. So there's just none of these work, and you cannot solve this issue by escaping the constraints that we currently face. You have to overcome them, and that doesn't mean that we individually or even collectively, as working together as individuals who are collaborating, can actually solve these problems. I actually don't think that we can, but we can improve the situation for us, and like I said, locally. So that should be the goal. But first, you have to define what is the good and what is a negative outcome and what is a positive outcome. What is the overall goal? What is the goal of the sentient system that you're within? God. What is God's goal? You want to succeed, align yourself with God's goal, and that is the best way to succeed. If you fight against God's core goals, you're definitely not going to succeed. And that's just like a cell is fighting against your goals as a person, as a human. It's not going to succeed, because if it does go against the human goal, then it's going to kill you, and in which case it's going to die. And it has to be there are certain problems that have to be solved on an ascended level, I guess. So cells that are not united into a singular sentient being could not figure out a way to organize and distribute resources and acquire resources and achieve goals the same way that we could on an organism level. So that is a pattern that continues throughout the logos of reality. So next topic that he was right about to get into is, what is sentient? And obviously sentient singularity theory is called that for very specific reasons. It's not just a cool sounding, kind of sciencey sounding term. There's very, very specific reasons why I chose that term, and it is because at its core it describes that fundamental reality is fundamentally sentient, and that in order to do that, you have to define what sentience is, and you have to be able to identify and list the attributes that are specific to sentience. That's one of the reasons why I try and use the word sentient instead of conscious, is because it's much more specific. But they're going to get into both of these talks in this discussion. So in this, he's talking about in this next clip about identifying sentience.
All AI risk topics, whether it's sentient or not is irrelevant. Whether it does stuff is all that matters. But how do you tell if it's sentient? And all of the Chalmers P-zombie questions or whatever are actually really hard, because what we're asking is, how can we use third-person observation to infer something about the nature of first person, given the ontological difference between them? So how would we know that that feature is desirable? Are there safe-to-fail tests, and what would we have to test to know it, to start making that conversion? But I don't think we have to answer any of those questions, because I don't think that anybody that is working on whole brain emulation thinks that we are close enough that it would address the timeline of the economy issues that you're addressing.
Let's attempt to address one of the questions about substrate independence. What are your views? Is consciousness something that our biological brains do, or that requires a development from an embryonic stage? Like whatever it is that produced us, there's something special about us or animals? Or is it something that can be transferred or started up, booted up from scratch into what's not us? Like decidedly not us, a computer.
Okay, so this is now much more a proper theory of everything conversation than the topic that we intended for the day, which is about AI risk. So what
I love that he said that. It just shows an understanding.
do is say briefly the conclusion of my thoughts on this without actually going into it in depth, but I would be happy to explore that at some point. I think that how I come to my position on it, to try to do a kind of proper construction, takes a while. So briefly, I'll say I'm not a strong computationalist, meaning don't believe that mind, universe, sentience, qualia is purely a function of computation. I am not an emergent physicalist that believes that consciousness is an epiphenomena of non-conscious physics, that in the same way that we have weak emergence, more of a particular property through certain kind of combinatorics, or strong emergence, new properties emerging out of some type of interaction where that hadn't occurred before, like a cell respirating. Well, none of the molecules that make it up respirate. I believe in weak emergence. That happens all the time. You get more of certain qualities. It happens in metallurgy when you combine metals, where the combined tensile strength or shearing strength or whatever is more than you would expect as a result of the nature of how the molecular lattices form. You get more of a thing of the same type. I believe in strong emergence, which is you get new types of things that you didn't have before, like respiration and replication out of parts, none of which do that. But those are all still in the domain of third person accessible things. The idea of radical emergence, that you get the emergence of first person out of third person, or third person out of first person, which is idealism on one side and physicalism on the other, I don't buy either of. I think that idealism and physicalism are similar types of reductionism, where they both take certain ontological assumptions to bootload their epistemology and then get self-referential dynamics. So I don't think that if a computational system gets advanced enough, automatically consciousness pops out of it. That's one. Two, I do think that the process of a system self-organizing is fundamentally connected to the nature of experience of selfness. And things that are being designed and are not self-organizing, where the boundary between the system and its environment that exchanges energy and information and matter across the boundary is a autopoietic process. I do believe that's fundamental to the nature of things that have self-other recognition. And on substrate independence, I do believe that carbon and silicon are different in pretty fundamental ways that don't orient to the same types of possibilities. And I think that that's actually pretty important to the AI risk argument. But so I'll just go ahead and say those things. I also don't think, I believe that embodied cognition in the Damasio sense is important, and that a scan of purely brain states is insufficient.
Okay, first of all, that's the next clip that we're going to go to, because that's very important. But again, totally agree with what he is saying here. He's exactly right. But I like the way that he described it. He said there is different types of emergence, and there's weak emergence and strong emergence, and then there is radical emergence, I believe is the terms that he used. And in sentient singularity theory, there are different ways in which information is maximized, is grown. Okay, that is part of kind of the fundamental models of it, is that there's two degrees of freedom when it comes to growing information. One of them I call replication, and the other one is called stacking, which you can kind of mathematically describe these as being multiplication and addition. And one of them is addition, would be the adding of information that wasn't previously there, like truly adding new information. And the other would be replicating a type of information that was already there versus adding a totally new type of information. It's not just a new bit that's the same as previous bit. It's a totally different, space of information, even not just more information within a system. It's like you're adding a system on top. So when you have cells dividing in order to multiply, that is replication. When you have those cells unify into an organism like a human being that then stacks a sentient being on top of the assembly of sentient beings that are all your cells, that is stacking or adding of new type of information, which is like a new system of information in itself. It's not just adding more information that is of the same type that already exists, but might be slightly different in what it's conveying due to its relationship with other pre-existing information. But it's adding a totally new, I guess you could say, bit of information with that is not just following the same rules insofar as its manifestation as all the previous bits of information. So if each cell that you have is a bit of information, and the uniqueness of that bit of information is definable in its by looking at its relationship or its entanglement with other bits of information, other cells, the stacking of a multicellular organism's consciousness or sentience on top of that assembly of cells gives a whole new perspective that did not previously exist. And its relationship is defined by its relationship with the totality of the assembly simultaneously, not just, through this kind of disconnected domino effect chain like the rest of your cells have with each other. So when he's talking about weak emergence, strong emergence, and radical emergence, I think that the idea of weak emergence, where basically information changes due to environmental constraints and conditions. Strong emergence would be when multiple strings of causality intertwine, and you get something that's kind of more than the sum of its parts, or it appears to be more than the sum of its parts. And then he's saying radical emergence is when you get from third-person information to first-person information. I think that the issue with, and the reason why this model doesn't really totally make sense, and it's not so coherent the more that you extrapolate it out, is the fact that, for one, you do not get first-person experienced or first-person information from third-person information, because it only can happen the other way around. You can only get third-person information from the experience of first person. And even the term person in both of these implies that there must be a self, a person in place in order to even define the fact that these bits of information even exist. So this is the idea that, does consciousness emerge or evolve from unconsciousness, or is consciousness fundamental? And the only way that coherence is maintained in this is for consciousness, or sentience more specifically, to be fundamental. It cannot come from consciousness cannot come from unconsciousness. So, or sentience cannot come from that which is inanimate. And there is no evidence of that. It's funny because that is literally, it is the prevailing narrative in our scientific academic assembly, and it is totally without evidence completely. There's zero evidence of that. There's self-evident proof that sentience comes from, can only come from sentience, but it is, I do understand why this breaks down, because for many years I was a self-described atheist materialist, but it just does not hold up. So, radical emergence, I don't really think there is radical emergence. There is, in a way. So I do believe we will have a technological sentience, which is what most people call an AGI, inevitably emerge within the network. But it's not, it doesn't just evolve when we have enough computational power in place or enough connections in place or anything like that. It has to do with certain degrees of freedom being present in the environment that allows for the fundamentally ever-present sentientness of existence to manifest in that circumstance or that situation. So it's not that it wasn't there, really. It's just it's allowed to manifest in a kind of contained way, in a more contained instance than it would have otherwise be. But it always is there. So it's not created. So continuing with what he was talking about, though.
Also don't think that a scan of brain states is possible even in theory. And
sorry to interrupt. I know you said you don't believe it's possible. What if it is? And you're able to scan your brain state and body state. So we take into account the embodied cognition.
Sure. So I think
this next clip, by the way, just to give an introduction, is about mind uploading and extracting out the information that kind of makes up your experience and mapping it, and what really is it that makes you. What is it that makes your experiences your experiences? For instance, recently I was watching Avatar 2 with my wife, and in it they take the saved experiences that had been recording of one of the characters from the first movie who had died in the first movie, and they uploaded it to a cloned blue alien creature and a cloned avatar. And basically it's like he picked up right where he had left off. It's very similar to the show Altered Carbon that's on Netflix. I think it's over, but I did watch at least, I think there was a couple seasons. But it's about, they create something called a stack, which is just a chip that goes into your body, and it records your experiences so that if you die, you can take the chip out and put it into a new body, and voila, you continue to exist. There are so many philosophical implications that are very relevant to that entire concept. Is it really you? Is the first one that comes to most people's minds, but that's not even the fundamental and core issues in and of itself. The fundamental core issues is what is sentience, and the second issue would be what is experience, and how can you actually record it and save it. Is it just like a video camera where you just you just can save data that's in a video format, an audio format, and then just put it into a new cloned human or something like that? And that is absolutely false. And we will get a much better understanding of that in the years to come, due to some theories that are on the horizon, like assembly theory, which is, I believe, Lee Cronin.
Okay. It's not simply a matter of scanning the brain state. We need to scan the rest of the central nervous system. No, we also have to get the peripheral nervous system. No, we have to get the endocrine system. No, all of the cells have the production of and reception of neuroendocrine type things. We have to scan the whole thing. Does that then extend to the microbiome, virome, etc.? I would argue yes. Does it then extend to the environment? I would argue yes. Where does where does that stop its extension is actually a very important question. So I would take the embodied cognition a step further. The other thing is Stuart Kauffman's arguments about quantum amplification to the mesoscopic level, that quantum mechanical events don't just fully cancel themselves out at the subatomic level, and at the level of brains, everything that is happening is straightforwardly classical, but that there is quantum mechanical, i.e. some fundamental kind of indeterminism built-in phenomena that end up affecting what happens at the level of molecules. Now then one can say, well, does that just mean we have to add a certain amount of a random function in, or is there something else? This is a big rabbit hole, I would say, for another time, because then you get into quantum entanglement and coherence, so you get something that is neither perfectly random, meaning without pattern. You get a point distribution even on a single one, but it's also not deterministic or with hidden variables. So do I think that what's happening in the brain-body system is not purely deterministic, and also as a result of that means you could not measure or scan it even in principle, in a kind of Heisenberg sense? Yes, I think that.
Okay, so much to break down. This is great. This is where the discussion really gets into just the stuff that I love. I mean, I recognize the issues with technology, and I am interested in overcoming or improving certain political situations. It's a huge, interest of mine. But this stuff is really where I think just the work that I've done kind of it's very focused and has made significant progress. So, but the fact that he said all that of what he just said implies that I'm not the only one who has come to the conclusions that I've come to, because it is literally exactly what I believe as well. And I say on the stream, all the time, that before every single stream, I go and I clean my desk up and I organize it and I make sure everything is aligned and I make sure that there's no trash around and I get everything just very in its place. And the reason for this is because your environment is part of your mind. It is the space that you operate in order to process information. And, Jordan Peterson, as I've said before, constantly says, clean your room. And I constantly clean my desk before every stream. This is because organizing your environment is literally organizing your mind, because it is organizing your ability to information process or to process information, which is the organizing of information itself. And so it is a mental process to clean your environment, to organize your room, to clean your desk and tidy it up. It's literally a mental process. People think of this as a physical thing, but it is a mental process, and a fundamentally mental process. And a lot of this, the lack of understanding of this, is due to the fact that we think in I would say the prevailing academic narrative on any field that is related to information processing, especially if it is related to human information processing, is that a brain is where information processing is being done. Primarily, it is you. You are a brain in a jar that has appendages that you can move on it, and you're a meat robot or something like that, and that's so incredibly wrong. And you have a brain, as I've said many times, but you are a mind, and there is no place in which your mind stops other than when someone else's sovereignty enters into the equation. So that which you have the ability to change, and that which you have, you could say, control over, that is your mind. And the point in which it stops is the point in which someone else's sovereignty, either above us in the stacked hierarchy of minds, God, or someone with us in the stacked hierarchy of minds, your friend, or someone below us in the stacked hierarchy of minds, like your cells, have choice that they have that's sovereign, that can that you cannot override. That is the limit of your mind, and the limit of your mind is determined by others, and the sovereignty of other minds is really what it comes down to. So this implies a lot, and for one, memory, according to what I can see and the implications of my work, it's not anything that can just be scanned in the brain. The brain is like the physically manifested like structure, physically perceivable structure that is manifested from the actual entanglement of information that is occurring with you and your mind in a kind of the quantum substructure of reality that isn't really physical. And so while you can influence those connections by influencing and changing physically perceivable structures like the brain, you can injure the brain and it will impact your ability to process information. It doesn't impact your sense of self, actually. It might impact our perception of what you appear to be, or what your experience appears to be, but it doesn't actually impede your sense of selfness. It does impede your ability to interact with the environment and with your own body and things like that. Any of the physical manifestations of information that can be perceived. But the self is on a meta level. It's not physical. And this implies a lot about memory. That implies that memory is not a physical thing. If your mind is the entirety of your experience and the processing of that information and around your sense of self, then what your memory is it is a state of entanglement that you have with all other quantum structures that exist in existence, which is, cells and other people and being God, God, like I said, beings that are above us, below us, and next to us. And when Lee Cronin talks in assembly theory about assembly time being different from kind of the arrow of time, the arrow of time is an experienced constraint that we must deal with because of the system that we're within and the relationships that we have of entanglement with other sentient beings. But the more fundamental view of time is the changing of entanglement relationships between that which is fundamental, which is that which is sentient, which are quantum structures. And so there, like I said, there is no limit to what is you other than the boundaries of who you are defined by the boundaries of other beings. And, your mind ends kind of where another being's mind begins. And, but it's not that you're disconnected from even that. So, when you can't remember something, I think about this a lot, like what causes us to be able to remember something versus not, because this really doesn't happen that often with computers, traditional computers. Usually you store something and it's there. If it's not there, what happened is you changed the state in which, usually like the place it would look. But memory, if an experience is basically the summation of all entanglement relationships as they relate to you and your sense of self, then it means that your ability to access those memories as well is due to the connection and disconnection of entanglement relationships with that other fundamental holonic structures in the universe, so sentient beings. And so if you can't remember something, it's not a chemical issue, probably. And I'm not saying that chemical issues can't cause issues with how you are able to just process your world. But the thing is that the information that you have access to is literally completely due to the state of entanglement that exists in the current circumstances that you are experiencing and how those entanglement relationships relate to you. So there's so much more going on than just what is inside your brain. That's what this means truly, is that memories are stored everywhere. They're not stored in your brain. So you can't scan your brain to get your memories. That doesn't mean you can't kind of get a limited picture of certain types of thoughts that you may be having in real time by scanning the brain. You probably can. But that's information that is currently being its processing is currently being perceived, at least and measured, at least on a limited level. But if the implications of my work seem to be correct, and if Lee Cronin's work is applicable to this, and the implications of that would be correct, and if Daniel Schmachtenberger is correct here, which I think is the case, memories are stored everywhere. They're not stored in your brain. So you're not a brain in a jar. And you can't just take memories that, are like a external hard drive and pull them from one computer and put it into another, and there you go. You can continue existing. That's not the case, because these saved experiences that make you very much who you are not stored in any particular location. They are stored everywhere in the relationships that exist, the entanglement relationships that exist between fundamental holonic structures, which I would say are sentient beings. And this holds all kinds of fascinating implications. It's like when you can't remember something, and it's not just due to the fact that you're chemically, I don't know, like intoxicated or something, and you're just foggy or whatever, or you have had a brain injury, and it's impacting your ability to just process information in real time. It means that if you can't access your memories, it's due to the entanglement state of the entire universe that is going on, which is just wild. And I've thought about it a lot lately, and I haven't heard really many other people, or really anybody, talk about it in any kind of coherent manner. But Daniel Schmachtenberger, I think, laid it out pretty logically, which is, you have to scan everything to capture any experience, because information coherence and the entanglement of information structures, which are minds, that is it is fundamentally what builds the moments that we call experiences. Like, there's no other way around it. Just if you think about it very logically, that is every action that happens that leads to a certain circumstance, and every possibility from that specific circumstance is not constructed by just saved chemical reactions or something. It is constructed by the totality of every cause that has occurred to get us to this point. And so it's a very different way of looking at the mind and what is the mind. We focus on the brain in this stuff, and that is the wrong thing to focus on. You don't need to focus on the brain. Focus on the mind. You are a mind. You have a brain.
Of David Walpart and his limits on inference machines, sorry?
I have not studied his work.
Okay. Well, anyway, he echoes something similar, which says that you can't have Laplace's demon, even in a classical world, you can't have Laplace's demon. So let me talk about the...
So the last thing that I wanted to say that he had mentioned as well is when he's talking about quantum mechanical requirements being necessary to basically for you to be conscious, it implies that there must be some type of indeterminacy in the system. This is also something that I talked about years before this channel was even created in my previous channel, but the video is on this channel. It's one, I forgot which one it was, but where I'm talking about AI, but it's very old. And I discuss how quantum computer is necessary to what I now call a technological sentience, but what most people call it AGI, because it requires imagination to perceive the self, which means that you have to have kind of this indeterminacy aspect to your experience, where basic, it's tough to describe, but when he talks about classical computing, or when you think about classical computing, there's no possibility for anything other than exactly what is caused. So it's completely deterministic. And then he says things like there must be some type of indeterminism. And this term is throwing me off because it's not actually, I think, the best term for this, but I get what he's trying to say. There must be a degree of freedom that is present, that isn't present in classical computing or even Newtonian physics, where it's just like what is caused will happen exactly a certain way because of math, basically, and there is no other way for things to be. Whereas in quantum computing, there's a new degree of freedom that exists, where people say, oh, things can exist in two states at the same time. It's really the ability to entertain the possibility of multiplicity, being determining multiplicity. So this is why I don't like to use the word indeterminism, because it's not a war between that which is deterministic and that which is, free will. Free will and determinism are two sides of one coin. They are dependent concepts. They are not mutually exclusive concepts. They're not even just compatible concepts. They are dependent concepts. You cannot have determinism if fundamental reality is fundamentally sentient. You cannot have determinism without free will being responsible for that determinism. If I decide to drop this water bottle, it is determined that it will fall a certain way. If there is no such thing as determinism, then you can't actually make any choices. And if you can't make any choices, then there is no free will, which really all that means is it's the ability to make choices. That are, it's just the ability to make choices. You cannot make any choices if everything is deterministic and without an additional degree of freedom that gives you sovereignty. But it's still deterministic. It's just being determined by a being, whether that's God or you or your spouse or your dog or your cells or, proton, if a proton is conscious, which it might be. And but it means that all causality is due to will, and that means that that which is determined by someone always. So this ability to make a decision and have a sense of self both require the ability to imagine, which requires the ability to entertain a superposition mentally. You can think about what something would be like in two different states. And this means that mental structures, which is just minds, we'll just call it minds, follow quantum mechanical rules. And I've stated this for years now. And it seems like Daniel Schmachtenberger and I are in agreement that, but it's almost like he doesn't want to get into it because it's just opens such a can of worms that is so against the establishment narrative. But minds have quantum mechanical processes. They must have quantum mechanical processes in order for anything to make any sense, and for anything to be caused requires the ability to entertain a superposition. So this is this is the dance that we've had in quantum mechanics for forever, which is how much do we admit that this is very relevant to consciousness, and it comes up in every single quantum mechanics discussion, even though it is denied by the majority of establishment academicians. And I just think we should wake up and realize we can't keep this out of the conversation for a reason. But I agree with him very much, and that's very true. And when he talks about a third thing that he discussed there, oh my gosh, there's so much to what he says so quickly, and it, like I said, it's kind of difficult to process sometimes. But the third thing that he said that was very important there is that any self-organizing system requires a sense of selfness to be present. That's so true. And just think about the logic of that. It's like super obvious. It's not just obvious. It's like super obvious. It's super literally true that is the case. Like it's so in your face that it might be missed, is kind of like the issue with a lot of these implications and concepts. But and that's because we're talking about consciousness, and we are conscious. We're talking about minds, and we are minds. And that's why it's all so close that it's difficult to see what's right in front of our face. It's the forest through the trees issue. You're a mind, you're inside a mental structure. And therefore, if you're going to try and look for, mental structures, like, you're going to have to contend with the fact that you can't not see mental structures. You are always seeing constructs of mental processing because you are a mind. And but when we say, like, a self-organizing system like not artificial general intelligence, but artificial intelligence like Midjourney or something like that. My last week's stream was on Midjourney because the discussion that I wanted to talk about, which was on AI with Stephen Wolfram and Lex Friedman, was taken down right before the stream started. But I think that stream ended up being really good. But I talk about in there how it's not, there is no sense of self, obviously. I mean, I don't know if it's obvious, but it should be obvious to us that there is no sense of self with these algorithms. They're just really complicated programs, and that's it. They're just equations, but they are dynamic in a way that is different than many other equations that we have been, or programs that we've been running in tech. And the reason for that is because they are constantly being impacted and fed new information. So what's animating these programs are not self-animated programs. They're animated by us, and we have a sense of self. So when it looks like these programs, that these deep learning programs are learning how to do something better, they're not actually learning how to do anything. There is no self-organizing system to any deep learning programs. It's not learning anything. It's us that is optimizing it. It's us that's motivating it. If everybody stopped using all the AI programs right now, like ChatGPT and Midjourney, and we all stopped using it, and it was no longer connected to any new data inputs, and we just cut it off completely, it would sit there. It wouldn't continue to optimize itself and it in any new manner. It would just sit there. It's being animated by us. It's being optimized by us. It's not self-referencing because there is no self. It's referencing us. So this idea of, like, self-organizing systems require a sense of self. That's super obvious. It should be super obvious, but in its super obviousness, it's kind of difficult. It's kind of easily overlooked, which is that you cannot have a system without it being animated by a sentience, and without inputs and change happening that is being caused by a sentience that continues to self-optimize. You can't have it. A lot of the issue with so many of these topics is that they're so entangled with each other, and they're so multidisciplinary in their implications, and that to make any progress on these concepts requires a revolution and complete abandonment of the current assumption in multiple fields all simultaneously. So this has implications on the evolutionary biology, obviously. The idea that no, a system without sentience can kind of self-optimize to eventually get life is nonsense. It doesn't make any logical sense at all. It's just that we can't perceive easily the inner experience of that which doesn't interact with the environment in a way that we can recognize as a way that we interact with the environment. So when we look at a cell, we question a lot of times, is it sentient? But I think that it's not. Nobody would say that you're crazy for saying. I mean, some people would, but it's not that crazy of an idea today. to say that cells would be sentient. But so therefore animals pretty much usually assumed to be sentient by most of the people that I interact with, at least. And it is easy to recognize certain things that these things do when you zoom in with certain things that these beings do. When you zoom in on a cell and you watch it hunting for food and it's fighting other cells and it's it's going through its life process, it's metabolizing, it's eating, it's growing, it's dying, it's replicating. These are things that we recognize, and when we look at a dog, we recognize even more of things that we understand. When we look at atoms and molecules, we don't see as easily the attributes that make that we understand through our own first-person experience as being, attributes of having, sentience. But I think if you dive deeper, you would see that. But there is something about sentience that does recognize itself if you look at things the right way. I mean, it always just amazes me to see kind of the interaction that certain types of animals can have with certain other types of animals. Like the fact that orcas have never killed anybody on record in the wild it just shows that not only do they understand that we are sentient and we're not just like some log to kick it into the air 100 yards. There's something about our intelligence that they revere, which is amazing that they can even perceive that, because we must look completely handicapped in the water. I mean, we can't. It's not like we're moving with the same competence of a dolphin, but they'll kill dolphins. It's just fascinating. But so there is something about sentience that it does recognize other sentiences, but as you go down in objective scales, you lose degrees of freedom, and so what you're left with is kind of less information to go on. And if you're not focused on the right things, then you're gonna look at a cell but especially a molecule or an atom or a hadron or something, and you'll say that makes no choices. It has no attributes that are similar to us at all, and that's not true. But this kind of comes from the whole. You have to look at us as more on a more fundamental level as a mind with quantum mechanical constraints and degrees of freedom. And then you'll start to see coherence of patterns on different scales of sentience. But there's so much implied by these topics, and you have to rewrite it in many different fields. Psychology, evolutionary biology, artificial intelligence and programming, and even politics. It just goes on. But obviously a self-organizing system requires a sense of self. Organizing it never happens absent a sentient being. You tell me one instance that you can look at where you don't perceive a sentient being in your immediacy that is organizing it. If you say, oh, well, the cosmos, it's like you don't know if there's a sentient being organizing the cosmos. Or an atom, you don't know if there's a sentient being organizing atoms. But if you look at your room and you're just like, or a building or something like that, and you're like, nobody touched that at all, and nobody organized it, eventually it just falls apart. Entropy is an intrinsic aspect of how we perceive things in our world, and in the world of the change space, which is the world of the living, as we would call it. It's the space in which changes are made by sentient beings instead of the space in which sentient beings truly exist in, but don't make changes in. So, I mean, this is even true in classical computing to some degree. Trying to think of what here's the Okay, back to AI. Next clip.
Of tech.
Did we close multipolar trap?
Well, you mentioned that it first came up in Scott Erickson's or
Alexander. Yeah. And so basically the concept is you have many different agents who all them pursuing their own rational interest, and maybe they can't even avoid it because it would be so irrational. It would be so bad for them game theoretically that the effect of each of the agents pursuing their own rational interest produces a global effect that is somewhere between catastrophic or at least far from the global optimum if they could coordinate better. So this is basically a particular type of multi-agent coordination failure. And we see this all over. And the tragedy of the commons is an example. A market race to the bottom, like happens in marketing and attention currently, is an example. And an arms race is another example. Those would all be examples of a kind of multipolar trap coordination failure. And this is why if you have, say, one nation is advancing bioweapons or advancing AI weapons, either AI applied to cyber or applied to drones or applied to, autonomous weapons of various kinds. If any country is doing that, it is such an obvious strategic advantage that every other country has to be developing the same types of things plus the whole suite of counters and defenses to those types of things. And so you could just say, well, the world in which everybody has autonomous weapons is such a worse world than this world that we should just all agree not to do it. Except, how do I know the other guy is actually keeping the agreement? Well, with the nukes, we can tell because we can see if they're mining uranium and enriching it because it takes massive facilities and they're radioactive and stuff like that. But if we're talking about things like working with AI systems or synthetic biosystems that don't require a bunch of exotic materials, exotic mining that don't produce radioactive tracers, et cetera, and they can be done in a deep underground military base, how do we know if they're doing it or not? So if we don't know if the other side is doing it or not, then the game theory is you have to assume they are, because if you assume they are, you're going to develop it as well. And then if they do have it and use it, you aren't totally screwed. Whereas,
so this is this is the issue with everything right now. As he said at the beginning of the stream, that this is a many in one coordination issue, basically. And it's not just AI, it's not just weapons. It's, even though it is, it's not just marketing, which I come from a background in politics and marketing professionally, and I know firsthand, the incentives are there to change your content and to market in a specific way, to appeal to sex, to put out more shocking content, constantly, because your goal in marketing is to usually and I think it's actually the wrong goal, but there's two sides to every single truly good and true, I guess, circumstance or structure or concept that can exist. So with marketing, there's two sides of marketing that's very important. One of them is communicating what it is that you're trying to offer accurately and to the people who would be looking for it. And the other side of it is to just get noticed in the first place, and which translates many times to being distinguished from competitors, or to stick out in the crowd. But that's actually the wrong goal. The true goal is to communicate accurately that which you are trying to offer exactly to the people who want what you have to offer the most. So that's the ideal and true goal that should be the goal of marketing. It's not a negative thing intrinsically. It's so associated with the negative assumptions today, and rightly so. I do understand that, and I'm guilty even in my job of kind of falling in the lower to appeal to whatever it is that is going to capture the most eyes in certain circumstances, because the incentive structure is just there, and you have to consciously, intentionally hold yourself back. You can't just take zero stance on the moral implications of what you're doing, and have any kind of restraint or limits to that which you are willing to conflate, construct, and destroy. So, but the true good goal of good marketing is to communicate exactly what you have to offer to exactly the people who would want what you have to offer. And anything else is kind of compensating for your lack of ability to do this well. If you're trying to sell people on something quickly and as many people as possible, and maybe that's through leaving out bits of information or something like that that would otherwise make you less immediately attractive as a point of focus, that means that you're not getting the right information to the right people as much as you could be doing. Or you are just trying to maximize the amount of money that you bring in and screw the, confining yourself to doing so just with the people who are actually looking for exactly the product that you are offering. So there's a lot of just incentive structures that are built into our institutions and our civilizational systems that are due to the fact that because somebody stoops low, now everybody kind of has to stoop low, and then everybody's lowering themselves and lowering the bar and lowering the bar, and it just eventually just compounds as well, and that's a terrible thing. But it is a coordination issue, but it's also a wisdom issue. It's an issue of people not realizing the damage that they're doing, and or it's just a straight up moral issue where they do realize exactly the damage they're doing and they do not care. But I think that if you truly knew, most people, if they truly knew the totality of the damage that they were causing, the totality of it, they would not be doing what they're doing. And it's interesting, and we'll talk more about like some religious stuff in a few minutes when they touch on it. But this kind of trap where we have a conflict between the short-term goals of some and the long-term needs of us all impacts every single facet of human coordination, from, like you said, marketing to weaponry, to government and voting, democracy, and even our sexual and gender dynamics with each other. And I think about this a lot as people talk about. We'll talk more about gender in other episodes to come, but people talk about the double standard between men and women and our sexual actions, and how some things are okay for men and not okay for women. But the reality is that if you look at what this does, if some things are okay for some and not for others, especially in a relationship that's so entangled as gender, like let's say casual sex is more damaging in the immediacy to women. I would say that's pretty self-evident, at least to me. But people will say, well, okay, so I'm not going to care if it's my son. But the problem is that if it's damaging to women in the immediacy, but what this means is that in the long term, men need a woman who is a partner who is the best partner that could possibly be. If you're damaging all the women by exploiting them in the short term because it doesn't impact you in the short term in the same way, but then in the long term, now your dating space has totally changed because you have impacted negatively the opposite sex, and now you have to pick one to be a spouse. So like this, I know it seems kind of a random topic, but it was on my mind the other day, and it's that same kind of issue of like short-term gains for some is not being realized in its long-term damage to the self. So the way to solve these multi-level, long-term, short-term, disconnected and highly connected dynamic systems of feedback with each other is to kind of minimize or to maximize the awareness of the impact that our actions have, ideally before we take them or while we take them, instead of, we make a serious mistake and it impacts us long term down the line and we didn't see it coming. And so this is this is very true with voting and democracy as well, as people vote for things that are beneficial to them in the short term, but not taking into consideration the health of society in the long term. And like I said, this it impacts every level of human interaction. So marketing. But here, this is Daniel Schmachtenberger talking about the Sabbath. I keep the Sabbath. I'm Jewish, and in my family, we light Shabbat candles on Fridays, and I get off of social media, and I do not talk to people, and that's kind of as far as I've gone with it. But there are groups that do not change anything involving technology at all. They will, if something is you have a light switch and it's turned on, you're leaving it there until the Sabbath. So it's about not making changes to the network, which is technology is the fruit of the interconnected tree of civilization, which is a network. And so you don't want to make changes to it, is kind of what the Sabbath is in many ways about. But Daniel Schmachtenberger talks about it here. And just the fact that he has the wisdom to even bring this up is just, it's a breath of fresh air in this intellectual space.
Risk on the other assumption that they aren't. If you were wrong, you're totally screwed, right? So under not having full knowledge, the game theory orients to worst case scenario and being prepared against the worst case. But what that means is all sides assume that of each other. We don't know that the other guys are keeping the agreement. Therefore, we have to race ahead with this thing. And so...
Hold on.
Accelerates the tragedy of the commons. Why is it not much more simple, religiously simple, ethically simple, where we go back and we
Say, hey, what I'm going to do is outputting something negative. I don't care that if you do it, you're going to get ahead. I don't care if you're going to eliminate me. I would rather die for your sins rather than contribute my own sins. So the selflessness. Why isn't that sort of ethic? Like we say, we don't want to be Luddites, but why isn't that a solution?
I mean, you're bringing up a great point, which is, can there be a long-range thinking about the kind of world we want to live in and a recognition of the kind of beings we have to be, the behaviors we would have to do and not do for that world to come about, where we bind ourselves, right? Where we have some kind of, whether the ethics reduces to law, meaning there's a monopoly of violence that backs up the thing or not, can we at least self-police in some way towards it? And the answer is, the long-term answer must involve that, I would argue. Past examples have involved it, but let's talk about where it's limited. One could argue that the Sabbath and the punishments for violating the Sabbath is an example of binding a multipolar trap. So you're not going to work on the Sabbath. And if you do, there's 29 different reasons laid out why you can be killed for working on the Sabbath. It seems to secular people not thinking about the Chesterton fence deeply, it seems like a ridiculous, wacky religious idea not grounded in anything with a ridiculous amount of consequence. Now, your theory of justice is it only a personal or is it a collective theory of justice, right? Some theories of justice are your punishment is not based on just what was right for that one person, but creating an adequate deterrent for the entire population. Because if you don't, what happens? So a classic example is Singapore's drug policy is pretty harsh, right? Life in prison for just possession of drugs. Well, that was following the devastating effect that the British had on the Chinese with the Opium Wars, and recognizing how, as a kind of population-centric warfare, the British were able to influence like catastrophic damage on China. They're like, we don't want that here, and we know that there are external forces that will push to do that kind of thing, and it's not just personal choice once there are asymmetric forces trying to affect the most vulnerable people in the most vulnerable ways. So we're going to make it to where the deterrent on drug use is so bad nobody will do it. So if you say that, you actually have to lock somebody up forever for smoking pot, which feels very unfair to them. But you probably only have to do that like a few times before nobody ever will fucking touch it, because the deterrent is so bad and they believe it'll be enforced. We're hands off. And if the net effect on the society as a whole is that you don't have black markets associated with drugs and gangs and the violence that's associated, and you don't have ODs, and you don't have the susceptibility to population-centric warfare and whatever, they might argue a utilitarian ethical calculus that the harsh punishment was radically less harm to the total situation than not having that, right? So you have a strong deterrent. So that's just, I'm not saying that I think that is an adequate theory of justice, but it is a theory of justice, right? So let's say that the Sabbath was something like this, and I'm not saying that the rabbis that were creating it at the time thought this, though many people suggest that that's probably what they thought. some very competitive people wanting to get ahead will work every day. They'll work 7 days a week, and as a result, they'll be able to get a little bit more grain farming, whatever, then other people get more surplus, start turning that into compounding benefits. And if anyone does, it'll create competitive pressure where everyone has to. So nobody spends any time with their family. Nobody spends any time connecting to what binds the culture together, the religious idea, etc. So we're going to make a Sabbath where no one is even allowed to work. And there's such a harsh punishment against it that we're binding the multipolar trap, right? Because even though it would make sense in that person's rational interest to work that extra day a few times to get ahead, the net effect on the society cumulatively is actually a shittier world. So we're going to bind it because people having that time off to be with their family, each other, and studying ethics is a good idea. I would argue that religion has heaps of examples like this of how do we bind our own behavior to be aligned with some ethic. But I would also argue, because that was the question you were asking, right? Is there some kind of religious bind to the multipolar trap? And I think that the Sabbath is a good example. I think we can also show how well that didn't work for Tibet when China invaded, right? Which is, we want to be nonviolently oriented. We have a religion that's oriented towards nonviolence. And we can see that there were, if you think about it, the time of Genghis Khan or Alexander the Great or whatever, where you have a set of worldviews that doesn't constrain itself in that way. And it's going to go.
He's basically saying that if you have a peaceful culture and you're invaded by a warring culture, you're at a disadvantage. And but the Sabbath, I think about the Sabbath very much like this too. It's very obvious to me, and it was part of my theological, realization to, especially even my scriptural realization, is that a lot of things in the scripture are very much about technology, and there's many levels to everything in scripture. If it's true, in Torah they say there's like 4 or 5 levels to interpretation in Torah. So you could say that one level of interpretation of a woman covering her hair is this, another one is this, another one is this, another one is this, or a man not covering his head. One level is this, one level is this, one level is this, and that all of them would simultaneously be true. So, so maybe the splitting of the Red Sea is, it's if it's in Scripture, by those who study Scripture, it is usually assumed that there are multiple meanings to everything. There's a metaphorical meaning, there's a historical meaning, there's a prophetic meaning of the, it's predicting something in the future. There's like a metaphysical meaning. There's so many levels of meaning to, there's multiple levels of meaning to each word if you believe in the divinity of Scripture. It's not just a historical book. It's not just a predictive book. It's not just a metaphorical book. It's all of these things. So when people ask me, is Scripture true? And I say, it's super literally true. They're like, do you believe it's literally true? It's like, it's super literally true. It's metaphorically true. It's historically true. It's prophetically true. It's metaphysically true. So, but the things that come about in Scripture, like the Sabbath, are very much similar. They impact things on multiple levels. If you believe that it is there is divine wisdom in the keeping of the Sabbath, and that there is a meaning to it that's not just some rabbis in the past thought it would be useful for this, so they created it, or even that it's just a bunch of nonsense that someone made up for no reason other than power or something like that. But it's clear that it has an impact on your life, and I can tell you from first-person experience of what it's like to basically keep the Sabbath in I think the most meaningful ways, that as far as when it comes to my understanding of it currently, is to kind of not interact beyond the people in your immediacy, and it's to get off of the grind as well, like to stop working and to focus on those who are around you, your family, your friends, the people who you value, which causes you to focus on the value of people, which causes you to focus on morality and what is good, and what therefore you start to think about what is not good. And none of this would happen so much if you just never got off the hamster wheel of the economy. So, and it also wouldn't happen if you never disconnected from the network that lets you perceive all these other things that are going on that aren't immediately relevant to you. And I've seen firsthand the impact that it has on your life. And I didn't grow up with it, but I do keep it now, and I see the wisdom in it for sure. It has multiple net positive effects. By the way, if you're watching this and you find this valuable, please hit the like button, share this, comment down below any of your thoughts, comment in the chat any questions that you have, and I will get to them. So the entire idea is beyond absurd, yet it is culturally manufactured plausibly. I missed what you were saying that about saving consciousness on a chip. That is, okay, yeah, definitely. It's absurd, but I understand where it comes from, but it's still absurd. It's built on fundamentally false foundations, and it is difficult to change fundamentally false foundations that you have if you are not an infant, because whatever your life experience has been has for some reason not required you in a way that you have obviously perceived to change those fundamentally false foundations that you have. There was an episode of Rick and Morty that reminds me of this, the vat of acid one. I feel like there's a Rick and Morty episode for everything, like South Park. I have not seen Rick and Morty that much. I've only seen like one episode totally through. I've seen bits and pieces of tons of them, but and I totally understand how I could get into it, but I also don't, and that for a reason, time. But yeah. Do you believe there is a process, belief system, or anything that can make sense of what is occurring to humanity and what to do about it? Yes. I think there are multiple processes and beliefs that can make sense of what is occurring to humanity and prescribe what you can do about it and what will be done about, and also imply what will be done about it. But at the same time, I think that any one of those that is accurate is not going to it doesn't let us fix the problem on our own. We need a head to the assembly to do it. And just like your cells working together could not fix a complicated problem that would require them to perceive information that is in a context that is truly beyond their ability to perceive. But if they are united into an assembly that is headed by another sentient being like you and me, and we can see the problem from a God's eye view, at least compared to your cells, it allows for the solving of that issue. That needs to happen on a level above us, and it has not. It's not just something that, if only we had this government and this combined with this religion, we would have a good world. No, this requires the stacking of a sentience on top of this assembly, and it requires that sentient being and its level of contextual awareness and wisdom to solve, like to truly solve. And that doesn't mean, though, that, like I said, that we can't improve the situation. There's plenty of processes and beliefs that we can use to improve the situation around us. That does not mean that it's not going to continue to get worse in other areas that are not applying truly what would be helpful. Of course, this, people act like this is kind of an all or nothing thing. Like, are things going to get better or are they going to get worse? It's like, you can make things much better going forward, but they will also get increasingly more chaotic and bad in other parts of society, but they will also get better in other parts. So, I mean, that's kind of always been the way that it is. It's with technology, it's empowering, and it's also, it is destroying. It's destructive, and it's also empowering. And it is the empowering aspect of it that, when combined with people who are not so wise, or at least in that specific context that is relevant, or they are wise, but they're wise enough to know what is right and wrong, but they don't care. that that we're going to have serious problems. I think that is very rare, but it does happen. I think like true evil, where you just know it's wrong, and you consciously, intentionally, very methodically, repetitively choose to not do it, and it's usually not due to an addiction of some type. That's like physical. It's like you just want, I don't know, to maximize the amount of money that you have. And I get people can say that they're addicted to money, but there is no, like, it's not the same as being like a drug addict or something like that, where you just can't easily stop yourself, but from doing something that you know is wrong. But even then, you have the ability to choose, like, to start to guide your path away from those things. And but there are people that would choose, even if it's against their nature to, and it's uncomfortable, it's not drawing instinctually to go towards evil. But I think that's extremely rare. You wouldn't think that by the way that we describe each other, but I think it is. So this is them talking about religion and ideological.
And I don't mean to harp on this point, but it doesn't have to
ideological proselytization. God, it's amazing that I can just pause this now.
be a choice between, hey, let me do good and let me not push my.
For those that didn't know, I had a less powerful computer and I could not do that before.
Views on anyone and
Proselytizing/killing. Because you can also proselytize and say your ideas, and hopefully maybe there is something in us, maybe there's something cosmically in us, I don't know, that says, hey, you know what, I like that. I don't like that killing. I don't like where that will lead. It resonates with me that the sins get passed down, or that the violence gets passed down and amplified. But I need to be told that. So I do need to hear that, because I can't come up with that on my own. So that's why I'm saying that proselytizing is a part of it, whether proselytizing is explicit or it's lived, and you just see how someone lives, and then you inquire, hey, what are your views? And why are you so happy when you have nothing, and I'm so miserable and I have everything? I just don't see it as a choice between you do good locally and don't tell anyone about it, or you can tell people about your ethical system but also oppress them.
Well, to make the thought experiment, we picked both extremes. So we can see that the Mormons proselytize, but they don't kill everyone who disagrees in the crusading kind of way. They have not expanded as much as the Crusades. They've not got as much global dominance or total population as a result. But they have not got nowhere, right? We can see that the ones that say, hey, if someone is interested, we'll share, but we're not going to proselytize because we have a certain humility of how much we don't know and a respect for everyone's choice. The mystery schools stay pretty small. And again, when we were talking about asymmetries, those who are more focused on the opportunity and downplay the risk move ahead, get the investment capital, et cetera, and those who are focused on the risk heavily don't. There's a similar thing here, which is like there's an asymmetry in the ideas that hit evolutionary drivers, even if perverse forms, right? Like in the evolutionary environment, it was where there was actual food scarcity. We evolved dopaminergic, dopamine opioid responses to salt, fat, and sugar, which were hard to get and useful. As soon as we got to the point where we could produce lots and lots of salt, fat, and sugar, and there was no scarcity on those things, our genetics didn't change. And so the fact that it felt really good when you ate that and incentivized you to get more of it, where that little bit of surplus might mean you make it through the famine versus not, it was an adaptive response, right? Then we create.
Okay, so there's two things about what he's saying. For one, what he just stated is that the issue with technology is that it allows us to create an environment that is out of alignment with our nature, which is not able to change nearly as quickly as technology. Technology changes within a single moment of a personal experience that is just a flash of a frame of an entire lifetime, whereas your evolutionary drives and instincts change on a lineage level between generations. They cannot change very easily, really, usually they cannot change within a singular generation. They need multiple generations in order to change, because the maneuvering and the changes that are being done happen on the lineage level instead of on the individual level. And this means that tech can create incentives that we just cannot adapt to and quick enough to deal with. This is true of food and our attraction to sugar and fats, and it's also true of sex and our attraction to certain attributes that are involved in or aspects that are involved in that. It's all kinds of things that cause this problem. Our desire to have social recognition that then now you can apply to social media, and it's like you're just runaway effect. You become addicted to likes, and even though it's not real, that doesn't make evolutionary sense. But there's something that's driving that does make evolutionary sense. It doesn't make evolutionary sense that you just want to eat cake all the time, but it does in a different context when you realize that like sugar was rare and it was very nutritionally valuable. It doesn't make sense that you would, take certain actions involved with the opposite sex when it comes to like the dynamics of mating that currently, but in a previous context where there are consequences for sex, then it makes sense that that certain drives would be there, when we make something super abundant that wasn't always abundant, it causes problems. And technology is kind of what we use to do that constantly. It's like part of the appeal of technology, and but it also has serious detriments. But I'm trying to think what else he was saying. Okay, so when he's talking about proselytization here, proselytization is something that's fascinating to me because I've thought about the Abrahamic traditions, which I believe in the divinity of all three of the big Abrahamic traditions, which would be Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And I think they have different roles, and we will talk about them actually on this channel in quite a bit of depth. But one of the things that's very different about their manifestations currently, and kind of you could say their underlying methodologies, even if in certain circumstances people have diverged from these underlying methodologies, these built-in kind of methods of spreading these theological traditions, they still have built-in different methodologies of spreading. So in Islam, there is no separation of church and state, which basically means that like there is many of these faiths, when you look into like scripture, it doesn't look like there's a separation of church and state. But when we look at the instantiation of them, or the methodological process of proselytizing, basically of spreading these traditions, there is definitely a difference in mentality. So for one, you have Islam, which it spreads in any way possible. It tries to convince you, or it would hope that, I don't want to say it would hope, but in Islam, the ideal would be like you choose it, then the next would be on your own, you just find it, and that's usually like with any kind of understanding of anything, it would be, that's like the deepest, truest representation usually. But then also we will try and tell other people to follow Islam and spread it throughout the world that way, and by telling of its appeal, the appeal of it. And then even if that doesn't work, then we will just force people to abide by, basic rules that don't violate the basic tenets of Islam. So there is a degree of force that is part of it, and it just is. And by the way, that's not a criticism. Like I said, I'm a fan of all three of these scriptural traditions, and I believe that they are true. But then you have Christianity, which is, yes, there was the Crusades, as Daniel Schmachtenberger talks about, but at its core, it's really meant to be a belief that is spread throughout humanity by, living it, and also by talking about it. But Islam, because it is focused on behavior much more so than how Christianity is focused on a belief, you could say Islam is defined almost by behavior, whereas Christianity is defined by a belief. It must be kind of something that's kind of eventually compelled because it's behaviorally focused. Whereas Christianity, you can't really be compelled to believe anything. You know, like if I tell you, you must believe that it is, cold in the summertime, then you might say, okay, yeah, sure, it's cold, but you don't actually believe it. And if it's fundamentally, its value comes from a certain belief, then you can't spread it by force. So it's kind of constraining in that way. Whereas Islam, because it's behaviorally focused, you absolutely can spread it by force. In fact, in a way, it's kind of built into what it is. And then if you look at Judaism, it's very focused on a people, but there's also, certain behaviors that are associated with it then that are kind of specific. And those, what's interesting about Judaism is that you can convert to Judaism, but it's never proselytized. In fact, it's very often like you're kind of dissuaded a little bit, but nobody's ever kept out who wants to become Jewish. But it is a process that must be self-motivated. Nobody goes around trying to, convince people why they should be Jewish. It's kind of it is against Judaism, and that is because it is fundamentally focused on a people and a people is someone's. It is this. It's not a thing. It's not an idea, and it's not a behavior so much. It's more like what you are being, in a way. And so you either want to live a certain way and join a certain people, and you are motivated to do so on your own. So therefore it tends to be much more self-selective in that way, or it travels through a lineage, like if your mom is Jewish, then you're considered Jewish, but you can also convert. So like there's different focuses of each of these traditions, and it impacts how they grow. So Judaism, people say, well, Judaism doesn't grow. Nobody talks about why anybody should be Jewish, and unless you are already on that path and you're like looking for it, then you'll find it. But if you're not looking for it, you're not going to find it. Whereas Islam, it doesn't. It's about compelling behavior eventually, inevitably. But then Christianity, it is about spreading an idea. And you can't really spread an idea by force. You cannot do it. And at least not truly. You can spread the hearing of an idea, but the adoption of it, the realization of it, the deep, identification with it, you can't spread that just by force, and but you can compel people's behavior by force. We do it all the time. And but you can't also compel people to join your group by force either. You have to let them come to you. It's like if you're, the Roman Empire or the American Empire or the British Empire or whatever is going around saying to people, now you're an American, now you're an American, now you're an American. Don't you want to be an American? We'll give you, money if you become an American, or we'll give you money if you become a Roman, or we'll the thing is that being part of that, any true group, is not about getting something like money. Like if they're joining for money, they're not joining to truly be an American. But if the only people that immigrated or I guess you could say converted to being American were people who were self-motivated in their attempt to do so, it'd be people who already identify with the core founding values of the group, and not somebody who's just now being lumped in and isn't actually in any fundamental way unified with the group. It's just like, you paid them to be part of it. So there's deep wisdom in how these three traditions go about their proselytization, or their growth. I don't even want to call it proselytization, but in their deep there's deep wisdom in how each of these theological traditions in the Abrahamic, tradition, I guess you could say, the Abrahamic faiths, whatever you want to call them, there's deep wisdom in how they grow in looking at that. And none of them are wrong, and none of them are better than the other. They are different in their goals. You cannot spread an idea through force. You cannot convince people to... You cannot convince people to join a group by incentivizing them with things that aren't actually, the defining aspects of that group. And you can't, but you can absolutely compel behavior. Like, these are just fundamental truths. There is no one is better than the other of these. They are three different aspects of focus in this equation. One of them is behavior. One of them is community. One of them is an idea. And they spread the way that they can spread. That's it. It's like at one of the local churches here, they don't baptize babies, but then at another church that I know they do, and it's like one of them. If Christianity is fundamentally focused on an idea, it doesn't get passed on through generations just by being born to somebody. Like, you have to realize it and identify it yourself. So issues come about when we actually branch away from what is naturally kind of the modality of the spreading of these things. When we try and make each one of these traditions not three parts of a single truth, but they're actually competing ideologies, and only one of them can be true and the rest must be false, you will absolutely fail at bringing any goodness from that it, inevitably, eventually, maybe in the short term you'll see some goodness, but it's interesting because if you scare people into doing the right thing because they're just afraid they'll go to hell, but they don't actually believe that there's a hell just because they logically arrived at that conclusion. It's because that's all they've ever been told. That is very easily manipulatable by bad actors, consciously and unconsciously, and it's also very much unsustainable. As soon as somebody gets an idea that breaks some little component of what they all they've ever known, it all comes crumbling down because they didn't actually truly internalize it in a true fashion. So you want people to truly do the things that they do. That you want them to behave a certain way because they see the value in it. You want them to hold a certain idea if it is good because they truly understand it and identify with it. And you want them to join a group that they feel is truly them. Otherwise, it leads to conflict because if a bunch of people join a group and they didn't join it because they identified with the core values and defining attributes of that group, then they're going to want to change the group, and all of a sudden you have conflict. So, this is very applicable not just to religions but also to nations, and I think it's especially relevant to the future of what is the nation, and how people self-organize into things like network states, etc. Let's try and get through this stuff quickly. Okay, here. At least a few more clips, and then we're going to go because it is getting late.
But there's also a lot of externalities and harms it can have. And we want to see how to get more of the upsides with less of the downsides. And that can't be a rush forward process, right? That actually requires a lot of thinking about how to do that. So I actually am a techno optimist in a way, meaning I do see a future that is high nature stewardship, high touch, and is also high tech.
High touch?
Yeah, meaning that the tech does not move us into being disembodied heads mediating exclusively through a digital world, but so I would argue that your online relationships don't do everything that offline relationships do. They do some additional things like distance and network dynamics, whatever. But if they debase your embodied relationships, they're causing harm. If the online relationships improve your embodied relationships, not just create online relationships and debase them, then that's a different thing, right? So that's what I mean by high touch. So I want to say that naive techno-optimism is, if we look at the history of corporations that are developing technology, market technology advancement, focused on the upside and not terribly focused on the downside. We look at 4 out of 5 doctors choose Camel cigarettes. We look at better living through chemistry, providing DDT and parathion and malathion. We look at adding lead to gasoline in a way that took a toxic chemical that was bound in ore underneath the biosphere and sprayed it into the atmosphere ubiquitously and dropped about 1 billion IQ points off the planet, made everybody more violent in terms of its neurotoxicology effects. Trusting the groups that are making the upside on moving the thing to figure out the risks historically is not a very good idea. And I'm mentioning that in terms of now trusting the AI groups to do their own risk assessment. And if you think about the totality of risks well, then you want to say, how do we move the positive applications of this technology forward in a way that mitigates the really negative applications of it? That if one wants to be a techno-optimist responsibly, they have to be thinking about that well.
So what about the AI companies that say we do third-party testing for safety? Do you still consider that somehow internal because they're the ones going out?
Depends.
Okay, so basically, we need institutional incentives that incentivize the long-term good, is what he's basically saying. And how do we do that? How do we form that? And I've talked about that a bit on here regarding political structures and voting and democracy and things like that, and marriage. And the goal is you want everything in our society, our tech, our institutions, our governments, to be prioritizing the growth, peace, and also sovereignty of people, essentially. And it's tough because often we set one single priority, but the reality is that if you set one priority and you don't realize that we need to optimize to a superposition of values, then you're going to have a problem. And most of the time, though, is that when you try and optimize towards a superposition of values in the traditional sense of just trying to make two priorities, you actually don't prioritize either, and something else bad happens because you didn't actually set a true priority. So, but you need to find how you do this is you find a structure that is uniting of a multiplicity of fundamentally necessary values like peace and growth and sovereignty. You can't have a government that just focuses on sovereignty, just focuses on and also focuses on peace, and also focuses on growth, all simultaneously. What you have to do is you have to pick a structure that is based on and is intrinsically focused on those things, and you have to focus on that structure. So what you would want, like, government to focus on marriage and it to prioritize marriage. That doesn't mean enforce marriage, because that causes additional issues, but to support and prioritize marriage would be a way of a government to focus on peace and growth and sovereignty simultaneously. But you can't have a government that simultaneously is built, into its constitution, peace and growth and sovereignty intrinsically, because you have to have a single point of focus. So you have to find a structure that is a single structure that has a superposition of attached values that are what you're trying to aim at. And if you're trying to aim at multiple values being prioritized being placed as priority, the reality is that if you're focused on something that's truly good values and that the values are that which should be the focus, there is a structure that is unifying of those values that you can find and you can focus on. And I would think that structure is pretty much just marriage. But when you focus on marriage and family autonomy, parental autonomy, spousal sovereignty, and parental sovereignty, then you're prioritizing sovereignty on a specific level at least. And if you, as long as you're not compelling marriage, which then you have a problem. You've eliminated goodness, because goodness requires choice in order for it to exist. You can't have goodness exist without choice, because morality can only exist when there is choice involved, because otherwise you just become these disembodied, nodes of the network, and that is disenminded, you could say, nodes of the network, as Daniel Schmachtenberger is saying, and therefore there is no good anymore. Like, you need to be, if you're forced to make a specific choice, then it kind of minimizes the goodness of that choice, because it destroys the multiplicity of sentience that can be impacted by actions, which is what makes something. It is the space in which goodness and morality exists, and is in the interaction spaces between sovereign beings. And obviously, marriage incentivizes growth, and it also is an optimization structure. You only need one refrigerator now. You only need one house now. You don't need two houses. You don't need two beds. You don't need two refrigerators. It's much more economically efficient of a structure than people not unifying their lives permanently. But and it also incentivizes peace, because you're building something together. You don't want to burn down, the supermarket if you've got children, or even if you're just trying to eat dinner the next day with your spouse. You don't want to burn down the supermarket usually. But so we need to find a way to do this. And I mean, like I said, I think that there's really one thing that needs to be the main focus that is incentivized and kind of rewarded, and that's or I guess supported, and that would be marriage. But it cannot be compelled, because then you destroy all the good that it could do. So another thing, they talked about social media and how we can use AI to help, with social media, and how do you not have it be detrimental. And they talk about how we must have a system that is centered around setting goals. And it's interesting, because as they were talking about it, I was just kind of saying to myself, I'm like, the only way to do this is to, set goals that are personal prior to, this process happening in and of itself. And then you have the AI programs optimizing towards the goal that you set. But if you don't set a goal, then the goal is going to be someone who doesn't care about you as much as you do, most likely. And then as soon as I said that, they said it. But we're going very. We need to go a bit quicker. So they talk about isolationism and how there's value in creating a smaller community, but like the Amish, or like the Hasidic Jews that basically are halfway to Amish, where they keep the Sabbath. They act like they're Amish on Sabbath, but then the rest of the week they engage with technology in a way that the Mormons, not the Mormons, the Amish do not, except when they do. I think it's called Rumspringa, is something like that. How you pronounce it? But I apologize if I botched that. But there is a moment in part of the Amish culture where you do interact with technology. You have to interact with the world. There is no way in which you are disconnected completely from the world. So, isolationism has limits, and also in the good that you do locally, you can maximize its spreading by keeping it connected, as long as that connection does not destroy the good that you've done. So they talk about those things. Here. Okay, this is kind of important. In this, they talk about
What you
how...
just said takes it.
In this clip, they talk about how even individual people within individual people, we have different motivations going on at the same time that are incompatible. And this is a critical thing to understand in order to understand self.
Somewhere that I wanted to go that's very interesting.
So we're talking about alignment, and is a particular alignment, is a particular, say, human intention aligned with the collective well-being of everybody or even their own long-term future. At the base of the alignment problems is that we are not aligned with the other parts of our own self, right? So from a kind of Jungian parts conflict point of view, motivation is complex because there's different parts of us that have different motivations. And one way of thinking about psychological health, the parts integration view, is the degree to which those different parts are in good communication with each other and see synergistic strategies to meet their needs that don't require that part of self's motivation harming another part of self, but they're actually doing synergistic stuff. So the whole of self pulls in the same direction. If you think of like the parts of self as sled dogs, they can be pulling in opposite directions. You get nowhere. They're all tripping themselves. So we can see psychological health and ill health as how conflicted are the parts of ourself versus how synergistic are they. Synergistic does not mean homogeneous. It doesn't mean we just have one motive. It means that the various motives find synergistic alignment rather than
Yeah, like our bodies are synergistic. Our heart is not the same as the liver.
Exactly. Now, and your heart is not going to optimize itself at the liver's long-term harm. Even though on its own, you could say it has a different incentive, it is...
Okay, I don't like the direction they're going there exactly, because it just, I mean, it makes sense, but I want to go a different direction with it. So in the, I study weekly with my rabbi who, like Jewish philosophy, and one of the things that is taught is something that's found in other traditions as well, and also found in, you know, secular philosophical schemes, I guess, or layouts and proposals. But it's in Judaism, there's two sides to your soul, essentially, or two souls within you. One of them is called the animal soul, and one of them is called the godly soul. The godly soul is the one that sees what is right and wrong, and kind of, it's your intuition, and it also is your logic and your it's your ability to see what is good in you know, beyond your immediate animalistic instincts. And then your animal soul is just your animal instincts. It's what's guiding you to eat you know, too much sugar, and in this context, but would have been guiding you to eat more sugar when you needed it, also in you know, in the garden before technological civilization. And it's but so you have these two things that these two sides to your soul, I guess you could say, these two incentives or motivations within you, every single one of us. And the issue with tech is that technology has allowed for us to be in an environment that is no longer in alignment with our instincts, like I said before. So now your animal soul is no longer in alignment with what you can kind of objectively observe, sometimes not, as being good and true and productive. But that wasn't always the case. Prior to technological civilization, it was probably much more common that your godly soul and your animal soul were in alignment on what actions should be taken in a specific circumstance. But in technological civilization, there's the quantity of moments in which they are not in alignment has dramatically increased. And I think that it's important to recognize both of these parts of us, whether you want to call them the godly soul or the animal soul, or just your instincts and your, I don't know, your intuition and reason, whatever you want to say. I mean, I think one would only get you so far, but still, it's still a helpful model, because I think that it's very much true. There's a lineage level decision-making process, information process that is, or self-optimizing process that's happening, and that is what we observe on the individual level as instincts. And then there is also an individual in immediate self-optimizing and decision-making process that is occurring, that is happening on the individual level, which is when you go about your life and make decisions in real time, versus when your lineage is making choices, usually through mating decisions. But these two sides of you are especially important to realize now when there's conflict. Ignoring one is not a good thing. Ignoring either is not a good thing. That doesn't mean that you should not choose one to follow in certain circumstances over the other. Of course, you're going to have to whenever they're out of alignment. But when he said mental health is about synergy or harmony and understanding between the different components of our own selves, I very much agree with this. It doesn't mean that you have to have your animal soul or your instincts in alignment with your reason and logic and sense of goodness and your godly soul. That would be the ideal, but you don't always have control over that, actually. And what is important in order to maintain information coherence that is happening within your own sense of self between these two motivations is to honestly recognize both of them and recognize when they diverge, and that's okay. But you have to recognize it and be honest about it as well. People talk about the more you lie, the more you corrupt your own mind and your ability to make sense of the world, and it kind of makes you go crazy. Or the more you're lied to as well, that can people say that kind of thing can happen. Just some, I don't know who people are, but people that I've heard say that. I totally agree with this. I think that this has applications even with people like schizophrenia and things like that. It's you can't tell somebody, if somebody sees something or hears something and, they see a demon or an angel, or they I don't know, they're like trees, they think entities are talking to them, machine elves or whatever. To tell them that doesn't exist and that isn't real is going to cause information in their information processing to become more incoherent. I think that I drive by people on the side of the street all the time here in LA, and I don't know what all of their issues are. I'm sure many of it is drugs, and some of it is probably like schizophrenia, and you can't see something, you can't have any kind of information input without there actually being an input. So that doesn't mean that what they're seeing is exactly what they how they are perceiving it, or how they are interpreting it. That's not the point. But if somebody says that they are perceiving something, they are perceiving something, and to tell them that that's not there, probably bad. And I think about this when I see people on the side of the road. Is I wonder if they have schizophrenia, and if us telling everyone that everything that you hear and see inside your head that I don't agree with and that I don't see is non-existent, and it's because you're just crazy, and here's a pill. That does not seem like that will help you in the long term. It doesn't. But that same kind of thing happens with us when we lie to ourselves about our own motivations and things like that. It's important to be honest with yourself about the different components that are of you that are motivating you and that are present within your own mind, and to deny them is going to cause information decoherence. You're going to now have to make a patch of some kind that's built on something that's not true. It's this cascading decoherence that is going to occur. And but what he's talking about here, where you're acknowledging the different components of your experience and of your motivators and of your own mind as being very necessary to even sense making within your own self, I think it's very true, and it has the profound implications on how we treat mental health, instead of, just prescribing everybody a pill and telling them that they're crazy, or telling them that exactly what they think is exactly what is, instead of just recognizing their feelings, and maybe your interpretation is wrong, but what you feel is legitimate. We don't do this correctly. We either validate, we either want to validate everything that anybody says ever, which causes them to believe things sometimes that they originally knew was not true, but wanted to be true, in which case now you have information decoherence because you're building on something false. Or we're telling them that something that they are truly experiencing is non-existent, and therefore now they have to figure out how to make sense of the fact that their experience is not, which, good luck. That doesn't make sense. There was this quote that was stated. This is one of the last clips that we're going to show, but I thought this was great, and this is something that was, I don't know if this is a quote by Daniel Schmachtenberger that Curt took and put in this, or if it was originally said by someone else, but it's very good regardless. Very true.
We do not think ourselves into a new way of living. We live ourselves into a new way of thinking.
You could say, talk to Ian about this, and I said, so would you say that the metacrisis, as I formulate it, is the result of getting the master and the emissary wrong, which is kind of getting the principal and agent between those two different aspects of human wrong? And he goes, yes, exactly. That's kind of the whole key, that there is a function that he's calling the master that perceives the kind of unmediated field of interconnected wholeness, multimodally perceives and experiences it. And then there's this other set of networks or capacities or dispositions that perceive parts relative to parts, name them, do symbol grounding, orient more in the domain of symbol, and can do relevance realization. What part is relevant to a particular goal I have? And salience realization. What things should be relevant to some goal and I should be tracking, and information compression, which are largely things that we think of as like human intelligence, which of course AI is, taking that emissary part and turning it into a external tool, rather than that's the thing that makes tools in us. Now take that thing and make that as a tool, but also unbound by the master function, way he would call that. It's a very interesting way of thinking about AI alignment and whatever.
That's brilliant. Basically, what this is about is that we think a lot about how logic is what should guide us. Like, should be logical, and what we don't really realize is that logic and that side of your mind that helps you figure out what is true and what is the on a contextual level is not the master. It's not the thing that is leading. It's not the mentality that is leading. It's not even the follower, really. It's like just a tool that's internal. And so then we have this, other side of us that is kind of our feeling, really. And we think a lot about how feelings in our society, that feelings, to be emotional is wrong, and you must be logical. And that the thing is that the feelings should be the leader, and and then logic is the follower. Feelings motivate us. Logic helps you clear the path. So like feelings are the engine of a vehicle, and the logic is the it's like the everything that helps you get from A to B. It's like the map. Okay? But the critical component that we miss when we have this debate between which one should be leading, the map or the engine, is the driver. And the driver is about decision. And so you do basically, if you don't set a goal from the start and keep to that goal honestly, then you have the problem. So if you say, that you have a political issue that is highly controversial, whatever it is. Maybe it's gun control or something, and people say, well, you can't be emotional about it. You have to be logical, and it's like you can't actually be not emotional about it. It's impossible. And logic should help you solve the problem that you're trying to solve, but you have to be honest about what that goal is that you have, and the goal that changes the entire approach. So if your goal is banning guns, that's a very different goal than the goal is to protect people or something from getting harmed by violent murderers. Like that's like the very different goal actually. So but it's the person, the driver, who sets the goal. And if you don't set the goal and you're just reacting emotionally, then yeah, you're going to be a chicken with its head cut off. But if you're just trying to act logically too, you're also kind of a chicken with its head cut off, but you're like even worse almost, because you're not even realizing what's motivating you in even being involved in and caring at all about whatever it is that you're trying to use your logic to figure out is motivated by emotion, whatever it is. So it's like there's three components to this that must be recognized. And but if you're going to make sense of any system or process, whether that is political process, whether that is a personal process, or it's a digital software process with programming or AI, or it is I don't know, navigating from one place to the next, or building a tool, whatever it is, it's all oriented around a specifically defined goal. If it's going to be oriented around anything, and it's going to be a sense, you're going to go about it with a sense of coherence and competence, then it must be oriented around a goal. But you like being honest about what your goal is with yourself and others is what kind of ends up being an issue in politics, especially, is people are not honest with themselves about what their goals are, and they're not honest. And if you're not honest with yourself, you definitely can't be honest with others. But and if you're not honest with others, eventually you won't be honest with yourself, probably too. So it all breaks down. But this is why I said earlier is like it's important that the most important thing is just honesty, and self-honesty, about yourself, with yourself, which is humility. And humility is that which preserves information, the coherence of information processing within a mind. It acknowledges the possible limits that you may have. It acknowledges also the possible strengths and competence that you may have, and it's how you connect what the information is internally with the information that others have externally, and also how you connect different motivating information motivators within yourself as well. So it's kind of the key. Humility. You could say humility is the key to wisdom, and wisdom is the key to prosperity. So they also talked about consciousness and the four different types of consciousness. This might be something that's like too much to get into, but we're gonna maybe look at it.
Where Einstein said it's an optical delusion of consciousness to believe there are separate things. There is in reality one thing we call universe.
Regarding the theme of consciousness, it's prudent to give an explication here, as often, at least I found, that mysteries arise because we're calling different
phenomenon by the same term, and this applies to consciousness, which doesn't refer to just one aspect, but rather several that can be delineated. To further differentiate, I spoke to Professor Greg Henriques on this very topic. I'm attempting to delineate a few concepts, that is adjectival consciousness, adverbial consciousness, and phenomenal consciousness, which I believe is the same as P-consciousness, but if that's not the same, then that's 4 different concepts. So what are they? Can you give the audience and myself an explanation as to when are some satisfied but not others so that we can delineate?
Totally. Yep. Yeah. And actually, adjectival, adverbial are going to, when we use P, when John and I certainly use P consciousness, phenomenological consciousness is reflecting on adjectival, adverbial consciousness.
And John refers to John Vervaeke.
John Vervaeke, yeah. Because we then did a whole series, Untangling the World Knot, to make sure that our systems were in line, both in terms of our definitional systems and our causal explanatory framework. So we did.
Okay, so I'm not going to get play the rest of it, but I highly encourage you to go and look at it in the actual clip, which is linked below, if you want to see more about it. But this is one of the reasons why I've tried to avoid using the word consciousness as much as possible, because first of all, it's not specific enough to define the foundational aspects of being. It's just not. Even though it seems like it would be, it's just not specific enough of a term. But it also is a term that we kind of use for at least three different definitions. You can say, I am conscious when I am awake. You could also say, I am a consciousness. And you could also say, he's very conscious of, that, or he's less conscious of, that circumstance or whatever it is that you're focused on. So there's like different ways of defining it. And I think that this is a very kind of important thing to get at first, to kind of get us past this word, is to realize that we are using it in at least three different ways. And then from there, now you have to actually just move past the word, because it's not specific enough, which to define what we're actually trying to get at, which is sentience, which is a much more specified term because it's focused on the having of feelings. And self-awareness is kind of built into the term consciousness as well, or at least how we interpret it. But having feelings is what is the experience of actually self-awareness. Is how we have self-awareness is through feeling. And then there's like a level of self-awareness of being aware of the fact that you are being with feelings instead of just being aware of the feelings, which makes you aware of yourself. There's like a backwards way that you can go once you reach a certain level, which, maybe that's like human and above, but that's for another discussion. So, yeah, this is a very important last clip, one of the last clips. It is on what is the Metacrisis, essentially. And
it's more of an index structure. But if we think of this kind of Bohmian wholeness, we could say that the Metacrisis is a function of missing Bohmian wholeness and doing optimization on parts. And so I can optimize self at the expense of other. But of course, that then leads to others figuring out how to do that and needing to for protection. And then now arms races of everybody doing that. The whole external, we said, I can optimize self at the expense of other. I can optimize in-group at the expense of out-group. I can optimize one metric at the expense of other metrics. I can optimize one species at the expense of other species. I can optimize my current at the expense of our future, all the way down to one part of self relative to the other parts of self. So the wholeness of all the parts of self in synergy and all of the people, species, etc., and how to consider the whole, how to consider the effects on the whole. Maybe that was something that other animals did not have to do. Maybe it was something that even earlier humans didn't have to do because they couldn't affect the whole all that much. When we have the ability to affect the whole this much, this quickly, because of tech, right? And particularly because of exponentially powerful tech, whatever ways we are either consciously saying this is a part of the whole I don't care about, or I'm happy to destroy, conflict theory, or this is a part of the whole I'm just not even factoring. Maybe I don't even know the factor that's in the unknown set, but I'm still going to affect it by the thing I do. So what is outside of my care or my consideration, right? Conflict theory and mistake theory, with exponential tech, gets harmed, produces its own counter responses and cascade effects. The net effect of that is termination. With this much power, what does it take to steward the power adequately is to think about the total cascading effects of the choices and all agents doing that, and say, how do we coordinate all agents doing that in a way that has the integrity of the whole upregulated rather than downregulated? And so I would say Bohmian wholeness is a good framework for alignment, not alignment of an AI with human intent, but aligned with the interconnected complexity of reality.
May I?
Okay, so I agree with exactly what he just said, but the thing is eventually we have to pick a focus that addresses the issues with a lack of awareness of this wholeness. We need to pick a focus that acknowledges and addresses the fact that growth is a requirement, that sovereignty is a requirement of goodness, that growth is a requirement of goodness, that that focusing on the past and focusing on the future is a requirement of goodness. It's not just focusing on the present, but it's also about focusing on the present. We need to realize a structure that, or a way in which we start addressing actually these problems. And it cannot be, like I said, a government that prioritizes multiple things at once. It must prioritize and supporting one thing that addresses these multiple attributes of what is required for systemic goodness. And I would just say that structure is marriage, and there is no other structure. But I don't know what else you're going to say or how many times we can talk about it, but I hope some people start to realize this, and I'd love to have Daniel Schmachtenberger on here to discuss specifically how do we take that to the next step, not just like what do we need a government to do, but like how do we get a government to do that? Or how do we, not what do we as individuals need to do, but how do we as individuals do that, which addresses this lack of Bohemian wholeness that he's discussing here. And I think that must be the next step of this. And I think that it is possible to realize that, But even then, like I said, you can't compel it, because if you compel it, you're going to reinforce the false adaptation and application of whatever it is that you're trying to compel. So you need to incentivize it properly, not improperly. Like you can't just pay people to do it because now they just want money or something. You need to weave its incentivizing aspects into something that is much more fundamentally applicable and tied. So and then two final clips. This is he's talking about it wasn't him actually, it was Curt, showed a engineer at Google who recently left, I guess, and was discussing kind of their fears around what we call artificial intelligence currently. And I think that there's trueness to what he is, to the concerns that he has, and also I think there's more to it, but we'll look at this clip.
This problem.
Geoffrey Hinton is someone who resigned from Google approximately 1 week ago because he believed that AI bots were quite scary. Right now, they're not more intelligent than us, as far as he can tell, but he thinks they soon may be. He also said here, in some of these quotes that I have, that it's hard to see how you can prevent bad actors from using large language models or the upcoming artificial intelligence models for bad things, Dr. Hinton said. After the San Francisco startup OpenAI released a new version of ChatGPT in March, as companies improve their artificial intelligence systems, Hinton believes that they become increasingly dangerous. Look how it was 5 years ago and how it is now. He said of AI technology, take the difference and propagate it forward. That's scary. His immediate concern is that the internet will be flooded with false videos and text, and the average person will not be able to know what's true any longer. Now he says, and I quote, the idea that this stuff could actually get smarter than people, a few people believe that, he said, but most people thought it was way off, and I thought it was way off. In fact, I thought it was 30 to 50 years or even longer away. Obviously, I no longer think that. Also,
okay, so first of all, just when it comes to being smarter than people, I don't think we know what that means, smarter, in the AI community. It's not just like smartness has to do with a lot of things. It's not something that a non-sentient entity can be. You must be sentient to be smart. But that said, when he talks about his concern of just the internet being flooded with things that are false and fake videos and deepfakes and all these things, and we'll not know what is true. This is a legitimate concern. I have the same concern. It will be something that we have to deal with, but I think also at the same time what we don't realize is that this has actually been an issue that is ongoing and has been ongoing since basically the creation of classroom-focused schooling, and where you're taken out of the real world to learn about the real world. And this causes disconnect where you're told secondhand information and you don't always have the ability to confirm it and experience it firsthand, and therefore you trust it. And this causes coherence issues, and it's causing many coherence issues currently. And the issues that we currently have are not even due to the introduction of AI. So while AI will definitely exacerbate this problem, there is a potential upside that we realize that we can't trust anything on the internet even more than we currently do. But I also think that at the same time, it will allow for people to be more easily fooled in mass at the same time that it increases our skepticism of the things that we would not want to believe. But I think that the biggest problem with this is that we are not acknowledging that this has been a problem for hundreds of years. And it might be exacerbated and accelerated and become exponentially more pervasive and prevalent with the rolling out of these AI programs, but it's the core problem cannot actually be addressed without realizing that it is something that's been a problem for a very long time. And it's not just a problem of AI, it is a problem of secondhand information being trusted over firsthand information and being assumed and acted on as if it is firsthand information. And so that's the real problem. The final thing that I want to end on is Daniel Schmachtenberger's advice on a good life, because I thought it was good, and then we'll wrap it up.
Beyond your own narrow life, or even the politics that is coming into your stream, or whether it's when you have a deep meditation or a medicine journey or whatever it is and connect to what is most meaningful. Design your life in a way where that experience happens regularly. So what you are paying attention to and optimizing for on a daily basis is connected to the deepest values you have. Because on a daily basis, the people around you and your job and your newsfeed are probably sharing other things. So try to configure it that the deepest true good and beautiful that you're aware of is continuously in your awareness. So your daily choices of how you spend your time and money is continuously at least informed by that. That's the first thing I would say. I would say a couple other things. Aligned with that is look at things that are happening in the world online to have a sense of things that you can't see in front of you, but then also get offline and connect with both the trees in front of you and how, without any modeling or value system, just how innately beautiful they are, and also the mirror neuron experience when you're with a homeless person, right? Like, so both have a sense of what's happening at scale, but then also ground in an embodied sense, your own care for the real world that is not just on a computer. There's a real world here. And then realize, like, deepen, shit actually matters. Like, independent of whether I can formalize a particular meaning or purpose of the universe argument or formalize a response to solipsistic arguments or nihilistic arguments, like prima facie, reality is meaningful. And I actually do care. I wouldn't get sad or upset or inspired or moved if I didn't care about anything. I actually do care. And so life matters, and I make choices, and I can make choices that affect the world, so my own choices matter. So what choices am I making every moment? And what is the basis that I want to guide them by? Right? To just deepen the sense of the meaningfulness of life in your own choice, and the seriousness with which you take how you design your life, particularly factoring the timeliness and eminence of the issues that we face currently. And then the last thing I would say is, as you could really work to get more educated about the issues that you care about and are concerned about, really work to get more educated about them, get more connected to the people working on them, and really study the views that are counter to the views that naturally appeal to you. So you bias correct, so that your own well-motivated biases don't mess up your action. And in doing that, don't let yourself become unagentic. Don't let yourself become so overwhelmed. Don't let yourself fall into easy certainties, but also don't let yourself be overwhelmed by the total uncertainty that you can't act, realizing that if you don't act, there are ethical consequences to that too, because we're on a moving train.
Thank you.
All right. That is that. I think that was great. So their full discussion is wonderful. It is linked below. I highly recommend watching it. I will probably watch it / listen to it again, because there's just so much to it. I hope that you found this meaningful, enjoyable, helpful. Please hit the like button. It helps fuel the algorithm. Comment in the chat on these streams, going forward. Comment in the comment section, and I try to, respond in the comment section. But with that, till next week. Other than real quick, I would like to thank Daniel Schmachtenberger and Curt Jaimungal for having this discussion and putting it out onto the internet for the rest of us to see and talk about, because talking about things very publicly it's there's positives and rewards to it, but there's also downsides, and it takes a degree of bravery and to talk about these types of things. It doesn't just take bravery, but it takes quite a bit of prep work and effort. So definitely greatly appreciate being able to watch this talk. So with that, till I will be back next week. Yeah, peace.